Have you ever wondered, when did the story of humankind truly begin? Before the pyramids, before Sumer, before the first symbol was ever carved into stone, there was once a time when the world looked entirely different. The seas were shallower. The mountains stood taller. And across the vast frozen plains our ancestors walked, not as nations or empires, but as wanderers, moving in rhythm with the breath of the earth itself. They crossed lands that no longer exist, valleys that once lay beneath the South China Sea, forests now sleeping under the North Sea, and endless grasslands that once linked Siberia to Alaska, where today only waves and whales remain. We call it the Ice Age, but to them it was simply the world, a world of migration, of survival, of dawns that did not yet know if another day would come. Then, as the ice melted and the waters rose, everything changed. The lands vanished, and with them memories, languages, and the traces of those first footsteps faded into silence. Who were they? What did they see in that half-frozen, half-living world? And how much of their story still lives within us, in our blood, in our legends, in those faint dreams of a homeland long lost beneath the sea? Perhaps the Great Flood was never just a single event, but a slow memory of an age forgotten when humanity walked upon lands that the ocean would one day reclaim. Tonight, let us drift back through time, 2 million years into the cold breath of the earth, and listen to what still echoes beneath the waves and the ancient ice. And now with Lunora we begin our journey into the lands the sea once swallowed. If you looked at Earth from space, you might think it has always been this way. Blue oceans, brown continents, and white caps of ice at the poles. But in truth, this planet has never been still. It breathes, it contracts and expands, reshaping itself with every rhythm of time. And there was once an age when that breath turned to frost. About 2 million years ago, Earth entered a great cycle, what humans would later call the Ice Age. It was a time when glaciers didn't just cover the North and South poles, but spread far beyond, biting into grasslands, valleys, and places that were once forests and rivers. It wasn't a winter, it wasn't even a cold year. It was tens of thousands of years of snow, ice, and wind. Everything slowed. Rivers froze solid, trees stood lifeless, and herds of giant beasts began to wander in search of warmth. The cause wasn't simple. A slight shift in Earth's orbit, a tiny tilt in its axis, a flicker in the sun's energy. Together, they triggered a vast chain reaction. As temperatures dropped, ice grew. As ice grew, it reflected sunlight back into space, cooling the planet even more. A perfect loop of frost. The world fell into a new rhythm. Slow, heavy, and silent. And yet, in that silence, one small creature refused to stay still. They had no claws, no thick fur, no gift of hibernation. All they had was memory and 2 feet. And with those feet, they wrote the longest story this planet has ever known. The first of them, perhaps Homo erectus in Africa, began to leave the warm, humid lands and move northward. They didn't know they were leaving home. They had no concept of borders, no maps to follow. They simply walked toward colder lands that offered food, open ground, and freedom. Small groups followed river valleys, crossed what were then green deserts, and moved slowly into the ancient Middle East. Some stayed, some continued. None of them knew they were beginning a migration that would last 2 million years. A journey that would one day reach every corner of the world. Back then, the seas didn't divide the continents as they do now. The ocean was more than 100 meters lower, and the lands now drowned beneath the waves were open plains under cold winds. From Vietnam to Java stretched a vast grassland called Sunderland. From England to Denmark lay Doggerland, a place of forests, rivers, and herds of giant deer. Between Siberia and Alaska was Beringia, a massive land bridge linking Asia to America. Humans could walk from Africa to the farthest ocean, from Asia to the edge of a new world. They didn't know they were connecting the continents. They were simply moving forward, like rivers finding their course. On those endless nights that lasted for months near the poles, they sat around the fire, gazing at a sky overflowing with stars, where the Milky Way shimmered like a silver river. Maybe then, in the flicker of the flames, someone told the first story about where they came from, about the lands they had left behind, and about the icy spirits that watched over the new world they had entered. In that darkness, the memory of humanity began to take shape. Time passed, the ice grew thicker, each millennium colder than the last, but no matter how harsh it became, humanity kept walking, searching, living. They didn't conquer nature, they learned to listen to it. They followed the herds, read the wind, watched the sun, and built the language of survival. In that frozen world, knowledge wasn't a weapon. It was a way to live. If we could step back and see it from afar, we'd realize 2 million years ago, humanity wasn't just migrating, they were weaving the map of the future. Every footprint on the ice was a thread in the great tapestry we now call history. And when the ice melted, their roads vanished beneath the ocean, but their story remained, echoing in our blood, in our bones, in the shared memory we still carry today, because every beginning comes in silence. And our world was no different. It began with a chill, a step, and a memory that was never forgotten. Earth has never truly stood still. Beneath that seemingly motionless layer of rock, everything is always in motion. Molten rivers deep within the ground, ocean currents across the seas, and thin streams of air drifting softly through the sky. Together, they form the breath of the planet, a long, slow rhythm that, unless we listen patiently, we would never realize is alive. And sometimes that breath turns cold. Over the last 2 million years, Earth has gone through not just one, but dozens of ice age cycles. Each one lasted hundreds of thousands of years, and between those frozen eras were warmer intervals that scientists call interglacials. During those times, the ice melted, the seas rose, forests returned, and life burst back into motion. But then, like the slow beat of a heart, the ice returned, covering the world once again in silence and blinding white. That is the rhythm of the planet. Slow, eternal, and unstoppable. If humans lived for thousands of years, perhaps we would feel that breath more clearly. We would see the seas retreat, rivers change course, the air grow colder, and then warm again. But a human life is too short, so it all happens quietly. Each generation sees only a fragment of the great turning, and so we believe it is unchanging. But Earth is never unchanging. When the ice sheets expanded, sea levels fell by more than 120 meters. That was when new lands appeared, vast plains, deep valleys, and natural bridges connecting continents. From Southeast Asia to Australia, from Europe to North America, lands emerged and vanished like the heartbeat of the planet. When the ice melted, they disappeared. When it returned, they came alive again. And humankind, small, fragile, yet enduring, learned to follow that breath, to live with it, to move with it. There were times, such as 1.6 million years ago, when glaciers spread deep into Central Europe. Then, 800,000 years later, they retreated. Another time, they covered North America with ice, thousands of meters thick, crushing mountains and valleys beneath their weight. Each return of the ice was a vast reconstruction, erasing the old, opening the new. Rivers changed their courses, species vanished, plains were buried and reborn in different forms. Through this cycle of destruction and renewal, Earth shaped itself again and again. The winds of that age were different too. They were not just air. They were memories drifting between oceans, carrying the chill of the poles and the salt of ancient seas. Every grain of dust in the sky, if seen through the eyes of time, told the story of a mountain ground down, a river that had vanished, or a meadow that once lay where the sea now moves. When ice covered most of the northern hemisphere, so much water was locked away that the oceans withdrew, revealing lands we now know only through geology and memory. People did not know they were walking across places that would soon be gone. They only saw wide grasslands, mammoth herds, strange green forests, and believed this was their forever world. But that world was only a single breath in the long rhythm of the planet. When Earth inhaled, the ice melted. When it exhaled, the ice returned. And everything continued in that endless rhythm. The miracle is that through all those harsh cycles, life never vanished, it only changed shape. Humans did too. Each time the ice came, they moved south. Each time it melted, they journeyed north again. And so they traced the vast map of human migration. No wall, no border could ever stop that instinct. The instinct to follow the breath of life itself. If you stood upon an ancient glacier and looked down at the world 2 million years ago, you would see a sight both cruel and pure. The wind would tear at your skin, the sky dim with snow, yet in the distance a small band of people would be walking, wrapped in furs, carrying fire in their hands. Not because they knew where they were going, but because they knew if they stopped, they would die. And in that endless, aimless march, humanity became the species that learned to live through change. The breath of Earth is a cycle of life and loss, of ice and water, of forgetting and remembering. And through that 2 million year rhythm, humanity learned one thing, that nothing lasts forever, not even the land beneath our feet. The only thing that endures is memory. The memory of lands that once were, of footsteps once taken, and of a planet that still breathes with us, slowly, deeply, and sometimes very coldly. Before there were written words, before there were maps, the world was written only in footprints. There was no language to tell the story, no stone tablet to preserve it, only silent steps pressed into the mud, soon to be erased by wind, rain, and time. And yet somehow those very footprints became the opening chapter of human history. About 2 million years ago on the plains of Africa, a creature stood upright beneath the sun, Homo erectus. They no longer climbed trees, they began to walk far. Their steps were the result of millions of years of evolution, hands freed for grasping, legs built for endurance, and a mind sharp enough to watch and wonder. They didn't yet know who they were, but with every journey they were learning how to become human. The first migrations weren't driven by ambition, but by survival. When the land dried and the animals moved on, they followed. From East Africa, small groups traced ancient rivers, crossed the Rift Valley, and reached the Middle East, where the world opened wide before them. Some turned east toward India and Southeast Asia. Others went north into the cold heart of Eurasia. They had no idea that each step they took was weaving the first threads of a global migration network. On the island of Java in Indonesia, fossilized skulls of Homo erectus have been found, proof that they traveled farther than any primate before them. In a world full of predators and harsh wilderness, they had little more than memory and persistence. They learned to shape stone tools to make fire, to shield themselves from the wind with their hands, to build simple shelters from branches. These small, humble acts were the seeds from which civilization would one day grow. Time passed. About 700,000 years later, a new species appeared, Homo heidelbergensis, taller, stronger, able to hunt in groups, share food, and perhaps even speak. In Africa, Europe, and Asia, they became the bridge between the hunter and the dreamer. They looked at fire not just as a tool, but as a companion. They knew that in the night, when the cold wind howled through stone and darkness, the flame offered not just warmth, but safety. And that feeling of safety is something humanity would chase forever. Then, about 300,000 years ago, another new kind appeared, Homo sapiens. They had imagination. They could paint, dream of tomorrow, and record memory through symbols. In caves of South Africa, archaeologists have found ancient carvings, cross-hatched lines, spirals, patterns with no practical meaning, but filled with something profound, abstract thought, the language of the mind. For the first time, humans didn't just live, they remembered. When the first generations of Homo sapiens left Africa around 70,000 years ago, they carried not just skills, but the memory of all who came before them. They crossed deserts and snowy mountains, passed through lands now lost beneath the sea. They reached India, Southeast Asia, and even Australia. They crossed the Bering Land Bridge into the Americas, carrying stories, symbols, and songs. Everywhere they went, they left traces, not just upon the earth, but within its memory. Perhaps within that very first step lay the destiny of humankind. A destiny not bound to any single land, but to the journey itself. From that moment on, we were not merely inhabitants of Earth. We were companions to its breath. And before history began, before writing was born, those footsteps had already written the first chapter of human memory, a chapter without a name, without an author, yet still echoing to this day, deep within us all. Strangely, though separated by oceans and time, these ancient peoples told the same story of water, of ice, and of life reborn after destruction. In one land it was a god of fire, in another a mother of the sea. All spoke of the same truth. The world changes, but humanity never stops moving forward. If there was ever a place that witnessed the earliest memory of humankind in the East, it would be Sunderland, the vast landmass now lying deep beneath the warm waters of the South China Sea, the Java Sea, and the Andaman Sea. Tens of thousands of years ago, when sea levels were more than 100 meters lower than they are today, the entire region of Southeast Asia was not divided by water. Vietnam, Cambodia, Malaysia, Sumatra, Java, Borneo, and the Philippines. All were connected, forming a single green continent nearly as large as Europe. Back then, the climate was mild, the skies cloudy, and the rains came steadily with the seasons. The ancient Mekong River flowed much farther east, merging with other massive rivers that poured into what we now call the South China Sea, which at that time was not a sea at all, but a fertile plain filled with lakes and grasslands. Prehistoric humans walked across what is now the Gulf of Thailand, setting up camps, lighting fires, hunting, and gathering food on land that would one day vanish forever. Geologists call it the Sunda Shelf, a natural bridge connecting mainland Asia to the Indonesian islands, allowing humans and animals alike to move freely. Beneath their feet flowed gentle rivers and plains so vast that the horizon was lost from sight. They didn't know that every step they took was pressed into ground that would one day lie deep beneath the waves. But if we listen closely, it seems the sea still carries the echo of those footsteps, faint, rising softly from the heart of the water. Across this land, modern archaeology has uncovered traces of ancient communities, stone tools, animal bones, and remnants of fires extinguished more than 40,000 years ago. Many of these sites now lie under the sea, once along the banks of ancient rivers, proving that people lived here long before the waters rose. And as the ice melted after the last great ice age, around 12,000 years ago, that world began to change. At first, it was just swollen streams and rising lakes. Then, season by season, the rains grew heavier, the rivers swelled, the earth softened, and the waters spread across the plains. People moved slowly, thinking it was just another wet year. But as centuries passed, the water never went down. It rose higher and higher, swallowing villages, forests, and paths. Hills turned into islands. Valleys became bays. And in the end, the sea claimed all of Sunderland. Perhaps that was the first memory of a great flood in the mind of the ancient East. In India, they told the story of Manu, who was warned by the god Vishnu before the waters came. In China, there was Yu the Great, who tamed the floods. In Vietnam, the tale of Son Tin and Tui Tin, the eternal struggle between the mountain and the sea. Across vast distances, every legend spoke of the same thing, the memory of watching one's homeland disappear beneath the waves. Many modern researchers believe Sunderland was the Atlantis of the East, a real, massive land that vanished when global sea levels rose rapidly at the end of the Ice Age. Beneath the Java Sea and the South China Sea, divers have found strange stone structures that resemble man-made ruins, along with sediment layers showing traces of fire and ancient pottery. Perhaps it was coincidence, or perhaps the remains of a world humanity has forgotten. Sunderland is more than an ancient name. It is a mirror reflecting how humanity is born, lost, and reborn. When the land sank, its people did not vanish. They moved, retreating to highlands and islands, then slowly spreading across the Pacific, reaching Polynesia, Micronesia, and Australia. The survivors of Sunderland carried with them the memory of their drowned world, retelling it through stories of rising seas, sunken kingdoms, and cities beneath the water. Today we call them myths, but to them they were truth. Perhaps they were the first to learn how to travel by sea, carving canoes from hollowed tree trunks, drifting across salt water with fire, seeds, and hope. They looked toward the sun, carrying with them what remained of their world, and began again. That is why perhaps when we look into the faces of the coastal peoples of Southeast Asia today, the Cham, the Malay, the Polynesians, we still see a faint reflection of that lost land, a light deep within the blood, a quiet remembrance that their ancestors once crossed the sea, not to seek, but to remember. Sunderland has been gone for tens of thousands of years, but beneath those blue waters perhaps there still lie the ancient stones, the silent rivers, and somewhere the songs of the first people, not yet fully gone. When we listen closely, we hear not only the sound of waves, we hear the sound of time itself. Amid the cold shores of northern Europe lies a shallow stretch of sea that fishermen still call Dogger Bank. Each season they cast their nets and pull up fish, shells, and sometimes something far older, a fossilized bone, a stone axe, or the tooth of a mammoth. And whenever that happens, they know that beneath them once lay a land now lost. Doggerland, as it would later be named, was once a green heart of Europe, connecting Britain with the Netherlands, Denmark, and Germany. About 15,000 years ago, while ice still blanketed northern Europe, sea levels were hundreds of meters lower than today. What is now the North Sea was then a vast grassland filled with oak and pine forests, winding rivers, red deer, bison, wild horses, and scattered bands of hunter-gatherers. They didn't know they were living through a time of transition, when the ice was melting, the air was warming, and the world was preparing to change forever. They only noticed that spring came earlier, snow melted slower, and the lowlands began to flood. In caves along the coasts, they carved animals into the stone, told stories by firelight, and taught their children how to hunt with sharpened spears. Their lives were simple, bound to nature, until the water began to rise. It didn't happen in a single night, nor like the myths say, but slowly, day by day, season by season. The sea crept forward, cutting through valleys, spilling into marshes, turning old paths into lakes, then rivers, then open sea. Those who lived in the lowlands moved gradually uphill, carrying their tools, their children, their fire. Each generation moved farther than the one before, not realizing they were leaving behind an entire world. Around 8,000 years ago, the last great Arctic glaciers began to collapse. Gigantic sheets of ice broke from the land and crashed into the ocean. Then, a massive volcanic landslide off the coast of Norway, the Storegga event, sent a towering tsunami surging across northern Europe. In an instant, the waters rose more than 10 meters, drowning the heart of Doggerland. The forests disappeared, the grasslands were gone, and all that remained was sea. The survivors must have told their children about the land that was swallowed. They spoke of forests that once grew where waves now roll, of hills where their ancestors built shelters, of the ground they could now only dream of. Over generations, those memories became legend. In the north, people told of the gods' continent that sank beneath the waves. In ancient Britain, tales spoke of lands taken by the wrath of the sea. And even through the centuries, the memory endured. Modern archaeologists have found unmistakable traces beneath the North Sea. Tree roots, fossilized pollen, human bones, stone tools, and even fire pits where ancient people once cooked and gathered. In some places, footprints are still pressed into layers of ancient mud turned to sediment. Each fragment pulled from the sea is a piece of memory, a reminder that the ocean does not only swallow land, but time itself. Doggerland is more than a lost land. It is a testament to the endless rhythm of the world, where no matter how strong we build, nothing truly lasts. Every civilization begins by the water, and in time it ends there too. Doggerland mirrors that truth, life emerging, flourishing, and then sinking, leaving its echo in sand, in wave, and in the memory of humankind. Today, when you look out from the British coast toward the horizon, you see only calm water, glimmering silver beneath the moon. But if you close your eyes, you can almost hear it, the sound of footsteps on grass, the wind through the trees, the laughter of children by an ancient river. It is all still there, not gone, just sleeping, like a dream from an older world. Perhaps when the North Sea whispers on stormy nights, what we hear is not merely the waves, but the voice of a land still telling its story. For memory, even when buried beneath the sea, never truly disappears. It only waits for those who know how to listen. At the far northern edge of the world, where icy winds blow down from the pole, there once existed a great bridge, not of stone, not of steel, but of the earth itself. They called it Beringia, a vast expanse of land connecting Asia and the Americas, stretching between Siberia and Alaska, where today only the cold waters of the Bering Sea remain. But tens of thousands of years ago, when sea levels were far lower, this was the only path of survival. The road that led humanity to a new world, the last continent untouched by human feet. Beringia stretched over 1,000 kilometers wide, a frozen plain of snow, moss and grass, shining pale beneath a silver-grey sky. Herds of mammoths, bison and reindeer moved slowly across the tundra, their breath steaming in the cold air. In temperatures that dropped far below freezing, small bands of hunter-gatherers followed the tracks of the herds. They carried spears, fire, furs, and the memory of their ancestors, the memory of lands swallowed by ice and sea. No one knows exactly when their journey began, perhaps 30,000 years ago, perhaps 15. But one thing is certain, when they looked east toward the horizon, they did not see an ocean, only land stretching endlessly forward. That road was like an invitation. And so they went, not out of curiosity, but instinct. As the ice receded and old paths vanished, they carved new ones. They moved with the breath of the planet, like drifting dust that dreamed. Archaeologists call them the Paleo-Indians, the first Americans. They carried with them the skills their Siberian ancestors had honed for millennia, shaping flint into spearheads, kindling fire in the snow, tracking animals by faint prints across the ice. Yet what set them apart was not their tools, but their resolve. For in that brutal world, one mistake, a fire gone out, a storm too early, could mean extinction. And still they walked, they lived, they bore children, and sang beside their fires in a land where day and night each lasted for months. Beneath their feet, Beringia was more than a road, it was a home. For thousands of years, people did not merely pass through it, they stayed. They built shelters, hunted, dug roots, made tools, and lived in small, close communities. They watched the sun rise slowly over a flat white horizon and sink behind mountains of ice, perhaps believing the world ended there. But as the climate warmed, the ice melted, and the seas began to rise, Beringia started to fade. No cataclysm struck overnight. It was season by season, water spreading farther each year, rivers swelling, lowlands turning to marsh. The old hunting grounds flooded, and finally the bridge between the two continents dissolved into mist and cold sea. Those who survived kept moving eastward, deeper into North America, carrying their fires into strange new valleys and plains. They didn't know they had left their old world behind, that they had crossed into a new one where no human had ever walked. The evidence still tells their story, written in stone and bone. Beneath the permafrost of Alaska, archaeologists have found spear points, hearths, and the remains of small human settlements. In the western United States, ancient cave walls bear paintings of animals long extinct. In South America, human footprints are pressed into volcanic ash, more than 15,000 years old. All of it says the same thing, that humanity traveled farther than any creature before. And though the sea now divides Siberia from America, the connection remains, written into our very genes. Indigenous peoples of Alaska, Canada, and South America still carry the DNA of ancestors from Asia. In their songs, in their rhythms, in the stories told around fires, echoes of ancient Siberia remain. As if, when the ice melted and the sea rose, memory did not drown, it simply changed form, drifting through stories and dreams. If you stand in Alaska on a winter night, beneath the shimmering aurora, you can feel something ancient stirring. The green and violet lights curl and dance like the breath of the sky. And for a moment, it feels as though you can hear whispers from the past, the voices of those who once crossed that bridge, their footsteps still echoing beneath the sea. They did not know they were writing a new chapter of humanity, but because of them, the world became whole. Beringia has long been buried beneath the waves, yet in every northern wind, in every drifting piece of ice, and in the eyes of the people of the north, its memory endures. It is a symbol of connection between continents, between past and present, between remembering and forgetting. And perhaps somewhere deep beneath that frozen sea, the final footprints still rest, the steps of the first humans who dared to walk to the end of the world. If you look at a modern map of the Middle East, you'll see a deep blue body of water resting between Iran and Arabia, the Persian Gulf. But few know that tens of thousands of years ago that was not a sea. It was a vast valley filled with rivers, forests, and fertile plains, a hidden paradise between two great deserts. Scientists call it the ancient Persian Gulf Basin, but to our ancestors it may have had another name, the Garden of Life. Around 100,000 years ago, as ice built up at the poles, global sea levels dropped dramatically. Rivers flowing from the Zagros Mountains in the east and the Arabian Highlands in the west joined into a massive network, converging in a Great Depression out or what is now the floor of the Persian Gulf. It was a wide green plain of freshwater lakes, forests, and rich soil, perhaps one of the first true human havens in Western Asia. Here, people built shelters, practiced primitive farming, hunted wild animals, and lived in balance with a gentle, welcoming nature. Beyond their borders, the world was frozen and dry, but in this place the climate was strangely mild. Warm currents from the Indian Ocean flowed through the region, creating a unique microclimate. Where rain fell regularly, grass grew tall, and wildlife flourished. Deer, gazelles, migratory birds, and great river fish thrived here. For ancient humans, it was not just a refuge, it was paradise itself, a self-contained world where they could live without fear of ice or thirst. But as the last ice age began to end, that fragile balance disappeared. Water from melting glaciers in the north poured southward, and the oceans slowly rose. At first, there were only flooded hollows, then streams that swelled into wide channels. Gradually, the waters took over the plain, the rivers changed course, and the villages became shallow lakes. People retreated to higher ground, building camps along the slopes of the Zagros Mountains or the Arabian Desert, looking down at their former home, now a vast and growing sea. By about 8,000 years ago, the water had advanced so far that there was no way back. The rising ocean merged with the Indian Ocean, and the garden was gone forever. Perhaps it was then that the memory of a great flood first imprinted itself upon the human mind in the Middle East. Not long after, in Mesopotamia, where the Sumerians settled, we begin to hear the same story, of a fertile land lost, of the flood of Utnapishtim in the Epic of Gilgamesh, and later of Noah's Ark in the Book of Genesis. Different tongues, same memory, the memory of rising seas and of people forced to leave their home. Modern research has strengthened this idea. Satellite imagery and geological mapping have revealed ancient riverbeds, lake basins, and depressions beneath the Gulf, traces of a vanished landscape. Along the southern coast of Iran and the eastern shore of Arabia, archaeologists have uncovered prehistoric settlements dating back tens of thousands of years, communities that suddenly disappeared just as sea levels began to rise. From a geological view, it was simply a natural shift. But through the eyes of memory, the Persian Gulf was where humanity first learned that paradise could be lost. From that loss, we began to tell stories of water, of punishment, of salvation, and of faith that even when the world drowns, the spirit can still endure. When the last people left that ancient plain, they carried with them fire, grains, and the memory of a blessed land. Some journeyed north into Mesopotamia, where they built the first cities along the Tigris and Euphrates. Others traveled east across Iran and reached the Indus Valley, where they laid the foundations of the Harappan civilization. And though they scattered, they all carried the same longing, the memory of the land they had lost, where humanity first learned the meaning of home. Today, beneath the shimmering waters of the Persian Gulf, the ancient valleys and riverbeds still remain, and perhaps even traces of those forgotten villages. But more important than the ruins is the story we still tell, again and again in many forms, of a prosperous, beautiful world swallowed by the sea. Perhaps Eden was never in the heavens at all. Perhaps it rests quietly beneath the waves among the cold grains of sand, waiting for someone to hear its whisper. Because sometimes memory does not fade, it simply sinks, slowly, into the heart of the ocean, where the breath of those first humans still lingers, calling softly from the depths of time. If you stand in the middle of the Sahara today, where there is nothing but sand, wind, and a silence so deep it feels alive, It's hard to imagine that thousands of years ago this place was once full of life. But Earth has a memory of its own, and sometimes it retells its stories through what remains beneath the sand. Under this barren desert lie the traces of ancient lakes, dry riverbeds, fossils of fish and elephants, and rock paintings that show one undeniable truth. The Sahara was once a garden of green. About 11,000 years ago, when the last ice age ended, the planet began to warm. Monsoon rains drifted northward, carrying moisture from the Atlantic and the Indian Oceans. The desert began to bloom. Immense rivers formed, among them the Tamanrasset, longer than the Nile itself, flowing through the heart of the Sahara and emptying into the Atlantic. Lake Chad spread wider than modern-day England, and hundreds of smaller lakes glittered across the land. Grass covered the horizon, and where once there had been only rock and dust, there were now cool plains filled with elephants, hippos, antelopes, and people. Prehistoric humans built their camps along the lake shores, fished, hunted, and painted their world upon the stone. On the rock walls of Tassili Naja in southern Algeria, archaeologists have found tens of thousands of ancient engravings and paintings of people, cattle, crocodiles, and even boats. These were not myths, but visual records of a real time, the era of the Green Sahara. In Egypt, long before the pyramids, archaeologists have unearthed stone tools, animal bones from freshwater species, and layers of ancient mud, all proving that this land was once open grassland. Around 9,000 years ago, people lived peacefully in this world. They were not conquerors, but children of nature, moving with the seasons, camping by rivers, following the herds. They had learned to herd animals, to plant crops, to shape pottery, and even to bury their dead with care. It was a time when humanity and the earth breathed in harmony, warm, gentle, balanced. But, as always in the story of this planet, change never rests. About 6,000 years ago, a subtle shift in Earth's axis changed the winds. The monsoons began to retreat southward. Rain fell less often, the lakes shrank, the rivers dried. Each year the grass grew thinner, the ground cracked wider, and the wind began to carry sand. At first, it was only fine dust, and dunes, then an ocean of desert. Within a few thousand years, that green paradise had died in silence, leaving behind what we now call the Sahara Desert. Once again, humans had to move. The people who lived around the ancient lakes followed the rivers eastward, searching for water. Some went west, toward the Maghreb and the Mediterranean coast. Others moved south into the sub-Saharan lands that would one day become the heart of West African cultures. But one group took the most important path. They followed the Nile, traveling northeast toward the fertile lowlands between desert and sea. And there they built something new. They were the carriers of memory, the descendants of the Green Sahara. And it was they who planted the first seeds of Nile civilization. Only those who had once watched paradise fade could truly understand the value of land and water. They settled along the Nile, planting grain, taming animals, building homes of mud, watching the river rise each year like the slow breathing of the earth itself. Perhaps that is why the ancient Egyptians worshipped the Nile as a god, because deep down they remembered that once the water had left them. Looking back now, the Sahara is not merely a desert. It is a vast memory of life, of change, and of loss. Beneath its endless sands, every grain is a buried moment, the laughter of children by the lake, the footprints of elephants, the songs of hunters around the fire. They are still there, only sleeping in the wind. Today, when we look at satellite images, we can still see the ghostly lines of Sahara's ancient rivers, long, winding veins across the body of the planet. They no longer carry water, yet they remain as reminders that the earth never forgets its past. And in every gust of wind that sweeps across the desert night, if you listen closely, you might hear the faint echo of a world long gone. A world where the desert was once a forest, and water was the language of memory. There are things we cannot see with our eyes, yet they flow quietly within us, like rivers beneath the earth, like winds passing through forgotten worlds. Inside every human being, within each tiny cell, there lies a kind of map, not drawn in ink, but written in the memory of blood. And it is that map, not any history book, that has been telling the story of humanity's journey for the past 2 million years. When science unraveled DNA, we discovered that every strand is a thread spun from hundreds of generations. Woven into it are traces of climate, migration, fear, and survival. Each time a group of humans left their homeland to wander far, small variations in their genes went with them. Those tiny changes traveled through space, through time, through the children of their children, leaving marks that tens of thousands of years later, modern humans can follow like a trail of memory. Geneticists call it the map of ancestry. And when they pieced those fragments together, an extraordinary picture emerged. Modern humans, Homo sapiens, originated in Africa around 70,000 years ago and spread across the world. One branch went east, through Arabia, India, and Southeast Asia, reaching all the way to Australia. Another went west, crossing Sinai into Europe, where they met the Neanderthals. Thousands of years later, yet another crossed Beringia into the Americas. The bloodlines spread like underground rivers, connecting every continent into one endless circle of life. When scientists compared the DNA of today's peoples, they discovered things once thought impossible, that the people of Polynesia carry the genetic imprint of Southeast Asia, that indigenous Americans bear the genes of ancient Siberians, that Southern Europeans and Western Asians once shared ancestors with those who lived along the Nile. None of this is coincidence. It is the biological memory of humankind's great migrations. Along the way were encounters that history written in stone forgot. When the first Homo sapiens arrived in Europe, they were not the first humans there. The Neanderthals had lived there for hundreds of thousands of years. The two species looked at one another across the firelight, shared tools, perhaps language, and maybe even love. One day they merged, not through conquest, but through connection. Today, every person of European descent still carries 1 to 3% of Neanderthal DNA, a quiet testimony to that ancient union. In Asia, the story was similar. The Denisovans, another mysterious branch of humanity, once lived on the high plateaus of Central and Southeast Asia. When Homo sapiens passed through, they met and mingled, and a part of them still lives on in us. Modern Melanesians, Papuans, and many Southeast Asians carry traces of Denisovan DNA, tiny fragments of a world long gone, still breathing within the present. Every bloodline is a memory, every cell is a message from the past. When scientists mapped the genetic story of humanity, they discovered that all humans alive today descend from a very small group, perhaps only a few thousand individuals, who lived in East Africa hundreds of thousands of years ago. From them, the blood spread outward, branching and rejoining like rivers flowing toward the same ocean. No matter how different we look or how distant our languages sound, we are all branches of the same ancient tree. Strangely, the genetic map does not only tell the story of life, it tells the story of lost land. Each time the sea rose, the people living there were forced to move, and their genes carried those migrations forward. When we compare the DNA of coastal peoples, we see links between lands that were once connected, between Vietnam and Borneo, between Iran and Arabia, between Siberia and Alaska. Science has proven what myth has always whispered, that we were once one before the waters divided us. And when we look deeper, we realize that genetics is not just the story of the body. It is the story of memory itself. In our blood are not only codes of biology, but echoes of vanished worlds, of rivers that once flowed, of shores that now lie buried beneath the waves. We may not remember, but our bodies never forget. Today, as humanity sends spacecraft into the cosmos and cities glow brighter than stars, there remains something ancient in the way we look at the world. Deep down, we still carry the spirit of wanderers, those who once followed the North Star, who pitched their tents by receding seas, who watched the sun rise beyond the ice and called it home. Perhaps the greatest truth genetics has revealed is not where we came from, but that we never truly left one another. Though seas rose and continents shifted, the blood still connects us all. Silent, steady, like the eternal current of human memory. And perhaps, in a deeper sense, it is proof that the Earth's memory lives on within every one of us. Before there were words, there was sound. Before history was written, it was sung. And within those ancient songs, sometimes just a few lines, sometimes lasting through the night, there were things no book would ever capture. For these were not merely words, but memories, the breath of generations long gone. From the mist-covered fields of Europe to the distant islands of the Pacific, nearly every ancient culture on Earth carried songs about water, of rising seas, of rain, of vanished rivers. It is no coincidence that in thousands of languages the word water remains among the oldest, least changed through time. For to humankind, water is not only life, it is memory. It is the border between what is remembered and what has been forgotten. When the ice melted and the seas began to rise, ancient people could not write, but they could sing. They told their stories through rhythm, through breath, through the beat of drums, the sound of flutes, the whistle of wind through hollow bone. Every song was a map, not drawn in ink, but carried in pattern and pulse. It told of the land they once lived on, the river that once flowed, the mountain that once shielded them, and the direction to the lands beyond. Children born after the flood learned those songs by heart, as if the memories of their ancestors were carved into their hearts through melody. In Australia, the Aboriginal people still preserve that tradition today. They call those songs songlines, the paths of sound. Each verse, each melody is a route guiding them across deserts, forests, and rivers, following the trails their ancestors once walked. To them, singing is not remembrance alone, it is creation. When they sing the name of a mountain, the mountain awakens. When they sing of a river, the river lives again. The world exists because someone still remembers it and sings it back into being. Across the ocean, in Polynesia, ancient seafarers sang to navigate. They had no maps, no compasses, only the stars and memory. Their songs spoke of constellations, the color of water, the feel of wind. Each melody was a miniature cosmos, linking human life to the vast ocean, memory to the present moment. And within those songs, perhaps, still beats the pulse of their ancestors, those who once lived upon the lost lands of Sunderland before the sea took their home. In India, the sacred hymns of the Rig Veda were not read, but sung. Each verse, each chant, was never meant to record words, but to preserve rhythm. Rhythm is eternal, it cannot be forgotten. With every recitation, that sound opened a doorway to the past, to an age when humans still lived in harmony with nature, hearing the voices of earth and water. And within every chant flowed the image of the river, the far shore, the promise of renewal after the flood. In northern Europe, the Vikings sang of Ragnarok, the day when the seas would rise and drown the world. In China, people told of Yu the Great, who learned to guide the waters instead of fighting them. In Greece, they sang of Deucalion and Pyrrha, who survived the wrath of Zeus when the world was submerged. Across the ocean, the Maya sang of the four suns, the cycles of destruction and rebirth. Separated by half the planet, their voices carried the same rhythm, the rhythm of water, of loss, and of beginning again. And if we listen closely, we will hear that beneath it all, every song tells the same story. The story of humankind, the creature that not only lives through time, but lives by remembering. For only humans remember. And only by remembering can we sing. Today, anthropologists are beginning to recognize what the ancients always knew. That language is not merely a tool for speech, but a vessel of memory. When a language dies, an entire world vanishes with it. A map, a melody, a realm of remembrance sinking into silence. But as long as someone sings, as long as someone listens, memory endures. And perhaps when night falls and you hear the wind, the rain, or the waves beyond your window, you are hearing that same sound. The voices of our ancestors, those who once crossed oceans, who watched their homelands sink beneath the sea, yet kept singing, because they understood something we are only beginning to remember, that memory lives only when it is sung. Before humans knew how to write, how to speak, or how to dream about the stars, they knew one thing: to survive, they had to keep the fire. Fire was the only force that stood against the darkness and the cold, the thin line between life and death during the long, moonless nights of the Ice Age. But to master fire, humanity first had to learn its oldest lesson: adaptation. It all began with stone. Rough fragments struck together by hand became sharp edges, the first tools. Over thousands of years, the human hand grew more skillful. People learned which stones were hardest, how to chip them at precise angles to make sharper blades, how to polish, carve, and refine. Every stone tool was more than an instrument. It was a sign of thought. To shape one, a person had to imagine its form before it existed. They were no longer acting by instinct. They were thinking ahead. And with imagination, history began. Those tools traveled with them across the world, from Africa to the Middle East, from Europe to Asia. Ancient people traded them, taught their children how to craft them, passed down the art from generation to generation. No one knows the name of the first person who made a hand axe or a spearhead, but every time a child learned to strike stone from their father's hands, a spark was passed on, not just of fire, but of memory. And then one day they found something greater than stone: fire itself. Maybe it came from a lightning strike or from molten rock spilling down a mountain, but one night someone dared to approach it, dared to hold it, dared to keep it alive. At first, fire was fear, a destroyer that burned forests and swallowed everything in its path. But in human hands it became a friend. They learned to spark it from flint, to coax it with friction, to breathe it into life. They learned to keep embers alive through the night, to gather dry wood before the storm, to use smoke to drive away beasts. And slowly they understood. Fire was not only a tool, but a symbol of existence itself. Beside the fire, humans were no longer solitary creatures of the wild. They had community. They gathered around the glow, told stories, sang songs, shared food. The fire became the heart of the camp, the soul of every tribe. In its light, they learned to see one another in the dark and to recognize themselves in another's eyes. Perhaps that was the first moment of true humanity, when people didn't just see the fire, but began to understand its meaning. Over millennia, that flame spread across the world. In Africa, it kept away insects and predators. In Europe, it warmed those trapped by ice. In Asia, it became sacred, a symbol in rituals and faith. And wherever people went, where there were ashes, there were footprints. From those simple campfires they learned to cook, to smelt metal, to fire pottery, step by step, turning flame into creativity. Humanity no longer merely resisted nature. It began to shape it. Yet, even with tools and fire, humans never stopped moving. Perhaps deep down they knew that flame survives only when it is tended, just as life endures only when it moves forward. They carried glowing embers in clay jars, wrapped in furs, so that when they reached new lands, they could awaken the old fire again. Each spark was a thread linking generations, an eternal torch of memory, and from fire and stone came language. Around the fire, humans began to speak. Simple sounds became calls, then words, then stories. Through language they could teach, share, dream, and remember. Language was the invisible flame, burning within the mind, warming the soul, helping humanity conquer the cold silence of the world. Looking back, we see that it was the union of fire, stone, and speech that saved humanity from the ice. Not strength, not claws, but the ability to share knowledge. In a brutal world, only community survived, and community existed only where there was fire, where people gathered around the light, trusted one another, and dreamed together of dawn. Today we no longer live among glaciers, no longer strike sparks from flint, but somewhere in every home, every light that glows burns a fragment of that first flame. It is no longer fire of wood or stone, but the fire of awareness, of thought, of creation, of memory. And as long as that flame still burns, humanity will keep walking through every cold age, through every winter of history, always moving, always reaching toward the light. Around 12,000 years ago, the Earth began to awaken from a long and silent sleep. Ice melted, mountains stirred, the seas rose, and the world was changed forever. That moment gave birth to the memory of the Great Flood, not the legend of one people, but a shared memory of all humankind. For hundreds of thousands of years before that, ice had blanketed much of the northern hemisphere. Water was locked inside glaciers kilometers thick, stretching from Canada to Europe, from Siberia to North America. Then, as the Earth's orbit shifted slightly and sunlight reached the poles in new ways, the ice began to melt. Slowly at first, then faster, then suddenly. Rivers of ice cracked and thundered southward like ancient beasts, pouring billions of tons of water into the oceans. In just a few centuries, the blink of an eye in geological time, sea levels rose by more than 100 meters, drowning plains, valleys, and every bridge of land humanity had once called home. Ancient lands like Sunderland, Doggerland, and Beringia vanished beneath the waves. Rivers changed course, mountains became islands, and fertile fields turned into the ocean floor. Humanity, long accustomed to solid ground, was forced to retreat to higher places. They watched the water rise day by day, as if some invisible god were advancing toward them, slowly, relentlessly. Each step of the sea marked the loss of a generation. Each wave erased a memory. The ancients had no maps, but they had memory. They told the story of the flood in the language of symbols. In Sumer, the god Enlil sent a deluge to destroy mankind, sparing only Utnapishtim. In India, Vishnu warned Manu in a dream to build a boat and preserve life. In China, Yu the Great learned to tame the waters instead of fighting them. In Greece, Deucalion and Pyrrha survived when Zeus drowned the world. Across the ocean, the Maya and Inca spoke of the suns extinguished by flood and fire. And in the Hebrew Bible, Noah built his ark to save creation. Different names, different lands. But one memory echoed across them all, a day when water rose and the world was cleansed. Modern science now confirms that these memories were not mere myths. Geological evidence shows that at the end of the Younger Dryas, around 12,800 years ago, the Earth underwent a sudden and dramatic climate shift. Global temperatures soared, glaciers collapsed, and floods swept across continents. Some scientists believe a comet or asteroid struck the Earth, triggering abrupt warming and melting. Whatever the cause, the result was the same. Seas rose, lands vanished, and the memory of the flood was etched forever into the human soul. People learned to fear water, not the water they drank or bathed in, but the silence that followed the waves. They saw their homeland swallowed, their mountains become islands, their fields fade beneath mist. In ancient caves, archaeologists have found carvings of giant waves, small boats, and human figures raising their hands to the sky. Perhaps they were praying, perhaps they were recording what they saw, leaving a message for those who would come after. We were here, we saw the sea rise. But humans did not only fear, however, they adapted. When the waters came, they learned to live with them. In lowlands, they built houses on stilts. Along rivers, they crafted rafts and boats, venturing farther than ever before. Water, once the destroyer, became the pathway. And upon those simple wooden vessels they carried seeds, fire, and memory to new lands where they rebuilt their world from the remnants of the old. Perhaps that was when the sea entered the human spirit. In every ancient faith, water carries a double meaning, destruction and purification. It washes away what was to make room for what will be. The ancient floods, terrible as they were, also gave birth to agriculture and civilization. When the waters receded, the soil was richer. Rivers settled into steady courses. On the new lands that emerged, people planted, built, and began to write the story of humanity. The Great Flood was not only an ending, it was a beginning. Today, when we read those myths, perhaps we should not ask, did it happen? But rather, what did they remember? Because myth, in the end, is memory told through the language of dreams. And that dream of a world drowned and reborn still echoes within us every time we stand before the sea. Perhaps within the sound of the waves there are still voices speaking, the whispers of those who witnessed it, for memory, like water, never disappears. It merely changes form, flowing from one generation to the next, from legend into story, from story into belief, and from belief into history. When the waters finally receded, humanity stood before its own reflection and realized how much had been lost. The fertile plains were gone. The ancient rivers had changed their course. The mountains that once marked the edge of the known world now rose like islands in an endless sea. In the silence that followed the great flood, humankind began to do something it had never done before. To build, not for shelter, not for harvest, but for remembrance. In the hills of southeastern Turkey, there is a mound called Göbekli Tepe, the Belly Hill. There, some 12,000 years ago, just as the ice was melting and the world was remade, people came together to raise towering T-shaped stones carved with lions, snakes, birds, and gazelles. What makes it extraordinary is not just its age, but its makers. They were still hunter-gatherers. They had no farms, no writing, no cities, and yet they built something that required planning, cooperation, and an astonishing depth of belief. Göbekli Tepe was not a village. It was a memory written in stone. It may have been a prayer, a monument to something that had vanished. Perhaps the lands lost to the sea, or the people swept away by the flood. Maybe it was humanity's first attempt to look up at the sky and ask, why did the world change? Each animal carved into the pillars may have been more than decoration, a symbol of the great cycle of life, death, and rebirth. As the ice melted, people lost not only land but certainty. And in that uncertainty they built temples, as if to tell the universe, we are still here. But Göbekli Tepe was not alone. Far to the east, off the coast of Gujarat, India, beneath the green waters of the Gulf of Cambay, sonar scans have revealed the outlines of walls, streets, and foundations stretching for kilometers. Structures that may date back 9,000 years. Researchers call it ancient Dwarka, the city of Krishna. According to the Mahabharata, when Krishna left the mortal world, his city was swallowed by the sea. For centuries it was dismissed as myth, until divers found patterns of cut stone that looked eerily deliberate. Perhaps it was not the city of the gods, but it was surely a city of memory, where people once lived, lost, and longed to be remembered. Farther east, near Okinawa, Japan, lies the enigmatic Yonaguni Monument, a massive structure beneath the waves with terraces, steps, and right-angled walls that seem too precise to be nature's work, yet too ancient to belong to any known civilization. Archaeologists still argue natural or man-made, but as one stares down through the shifting blue water, watching those submerged stairways fade into shadow, it is hard not to feel that, whoever shaped them, they carry the same quiet sorrow of something the world has forgotten. Maybe all these sites, Göbekli Tepe, Dwarka, Yonaguni, are not connected by geography, but by memory. They appeared after the seas rose, after humanity endured its first global transformation. When the old world was gone, people began to build symbols to remember it. They had no writing, so they carved their stories into stone. They had no maps, so they aligned pillars with the stars. They had no history, so they let the stones themselves remember. These early sanctuaries were not pleas for help. They were conversations. Humanity's first dialogue with the cosmos, with the earth, with water, and with its own past. They knew everything could be lost again, but if carved into stone, memory might endure a little longer. Just long enough for someone, thousands of years later, to stand there, look up, and remember that others once stood there too, and looked at the same sky. Today, when we stand among the pillars of Göbekli Tepe, the wind moves through the carvings carrying dust and cold air. There are no chants, no gods answering, only silence. A silence heavy as time itself. But if you listen closely, that silence speaks. You can almost hear the rhythm of chisels on stone, the footsteps circling the temple, the faint heartbeat of people trying to hold on to something larger than themselves. Perhaps even then they understood a truth we still struggle to grasp, that memory does not live only in blood or words. It can live in stone, in water, and in the sky. And only when humankind learned to build something eternal within the fleeting did we truly begin to learn how not to be forgotten. The sea has a memory of its own. It does not forget, it only hides. And sometimes when sunlight cuts through calm waters, we can glimpse the faint outlines of what was lost. Walls, pathways, shapes, too deliberate to be accidents. Beneath the waves, whole cities still sleep. You don't need to imagine Atlantis to know that the world was once larger than it is today. Beneath the Indian Ocean, the Mediterranean, or the Gulf of Mexico, traces of forgotten lands lie buried, places that were once forests, rivers, and human settlements before the sea rose to claim them. Every discovery is like an echo from deep time, reminding us that the ocean is not merely a boundary, but the planet's greatest archive of memory. Off the coast of modern Dwarka, India, archaeologists have found the submerged ruins of an ancient city, more than 30 meters underwater. Walls, straight streets, and terraced structures stretch for kilometers. Though still debated, carbon dating suggests it may have existed over 9,000 years ago, around the end of the Ice Age. In legend, this was the city of Krishna, said to have shone with golden light before being swallowed by the sea. The myth calls it the city that sank 6 times, and on the 7th was lost forever. Whether symbol or truth, one thing is clear. Humanity has never stopped remembering what the waters have taken. To the west, the Mediterranean holds other voices. Off Egypt's coast, beneath the bay of Abukir, lies the sunken city of Heracleion, once the great harbour of ancient Egypt, a centre of commerce and faith. It vanished around the 2nd century before Christ, after an earthquake and a collapse of the delta. Now, beneath layers of soft silt, colossal statues, pillars, and temples still stand. In the dim light of the sea, the stone faces of forgotten gods gaze upward, as if waiting for someone to call their names again. Farther north, off Greece, lies Pavlopetri, a 5,000-year-old city, complete with streets, courtyards, and houses. It was swallowed by the sea after an earthquake. Today, its walls still lie intact beneath shallow waters, its streets shimmering in the sunlight that filters through. Not imagination, but the visible reality of a civilization erased by time. In Japan, beyond Yonaguni, divers have found more underwater sites along the Ryukyu Islands. Terraces, stone pavements, square foundations resembling ancient temples. Across the ocean, in Cuba, sonar scans beneath the Gulf of Guanajuato-Bibes reveal enormous geometric structures 600 meters deep, aligned in patterns that look like the foundations of a city. The debates continue, but the feeling is always the same. The ancient world was never still, and its memory still echoes beneath the waves. What makes these ruins haunting is not only their age or beauty, but the sameness of the stories that surround them. Whether in Egypt, Greece, India, or Japan, people say the same thing: the sea took back what was once its own. In every culture, the ocean is both beginning and end. It gives life, nourishes it, and then one day quietly takes it away. Perhaps that is how nature teaches us that nothing lasts forever. When modern divers descend into the deep, they do not just touch stone, they touch memory. They see ruins draped in coral, trace their hands along worn steps, and in that moment, all sound fades. Only heartbeat and breath remain. Maybe that is how the past wishes to be heard, not through noise, but through silence. The cities beneath the sea are not only evidence of geological change, they are reminders that the world was once wider and that people once lived, loved and lost in places we now visit only in dreams. The ocean has taken their shape, but not their story. Every wave that meets the shore whispers it again, of cities that once gleamed, of fires that once burned, of souls that still drift through the deep. For perhaps the memory of humankind is not kept on land alone. It drifts beneath the waves, among the sand, the salt, and the trembling light of the sun through water. And if someday you hear a voice calling from the sea, it may not be the ocean at all, but the past itself, whispering from the shores that time forgot. There are moments when it feels as though the entire planet takes one long, deep breath and then exhales. And 12,000 years ago, when the Ice Age came to an end, that breath was the Earth's first, after hundreds of thousands of years asleep beneath the cold. The frost withdrew, the ice began to melt, mountains emerged from their white shrouds, forests returned, and the world, once a frozen giant, slowly began to warm again. The change was anything but gentle. It was a violent awakening, yet drawn out over millennia. Glacial rivers melted and poured down into the plains, carving deep valleys we now call fjords. Massive icebergs from the poles broke apart, releasing torrents of frigid water into the oceans, reshaping the entire flow of Earth's currents. In North America, the colossal Lake Agassiz, larger than the Caspian Sea, formed from melting ice, then burst its boundaries, flooding into the Atlantic and triggering a global climate shock. The planet was warming, but not evenly. Some regions grew hot quickly, others stayed frozen for thousands more years. Forests crept northward, followed by animals and by humans. Deer, bison, mammoths, and at last mankind all moved in rhythm with the shifting weather. Plains once buried beneath ice turned into vast grasslands, then forests. Regions that had been lush grew dry and barren. It was as though the earth was rearranging its own chessboard. For humankind, this was an age of paradox. On one hand, a warmer climate meant abundance, more plants, more animals, flowing water instead of frozen rivers. Yet on the other, the seas rose swiftly and land vanished beneath the waves. Fertile hunting grounds were swallowed by water, forcing people to adapt. It was then that humanity began to settle, to plant, to tame animals, and to build the first villages. From the chaos of climate, the order of civilization was born. As the world warmed, the rains returned. In the Middle East, rain carved out fertile valleys, the Fertile Crescent, where humans first sowed wheat and barley. In China, rice was planted along the Yangtze River. In Africa, the Nile was reborn from melting snow, flooding each year and leaving rich, dark soil behind. The warming did more than melt ice. It awakened life, setting the stage for the river civilizations to come. But the earth was never entirely gentle. As the weight of ice vanished, the crust beneath it shifted. Tectonic plates moved, earthquakes struck, volcanoes roared, tsunamis crashed onto coasts, some lands rose, others sank. And amid all that turmoil, humankind, small, fragile, kept moving, building, and telling stories. They didn't know they were living through one of Earth's great transitions, but they felt it, in the sky, in the rain, in the restless water. The people of that age saw things we can only imagine. They watched the sea invade the land. They heard ice crack like thunder. They saw the sun rise earlier each year. To them, the earth was not a still world, but a living being, breathing, aching, awakening. They recorded that feeling in myth. Every tale of gods creating the world, of floods punishing mankind, of mountains giving birth to rivers, all were ways our ancestors tried to explain what they witnessed. During this time, many of the lands we know today took their shape. Islands like Britain, Japan, Indonesia, and the Philippines broke away from the continents as the seas flooded narrow straits. Many modern bays, seas, and riverbanks are the sunken remains of ancient valleys. The world we recognize today, its coasts, its climates, its map, was forged in that very era. Yet perhaps the most extraordinary thing of all is this: humanity endured. They survived every upheaval, carrying the memory of ice and water within them, and began to build a new world. If the earth could smile, perhaps it would, seeing that the small, trembling creature once huddled beside the fire had grown strong enough to stand amidst the planet's own breath. And from that moment on, the earth entered its warm age, the age in which humankind would begin to till the soil, raise temples, kindle flames, carve letters, and look back upon the past with the eyes of those who had survived. When the waters receded and warmth returned, the world grew quiet for the first time in thousands of years. The ice no longer roared, the waves no longer rose. In that rare moment of balance, humanity began to rebuild the world. And in a land between two great rivers, they did something no one had ever done before. They turned the memory of survival into the foundation of civilization. That land was called Mesopotamia, the land between rivers. Between the Tigris and the Euphrates, where modern-day Iraq and Syria lie, water flowed down from the Armenian highlands, leaving behind rich silt after each flood. Every year the rivers swelled, spread across the fields, and then withdrew, leaving a layer of soil as dark and fertile as volcanic ash. And the ancient people realized that if they could predict the flood, if they could guide the water, they could make the land itself give birth to food. So instead of following the herds, they stayed. They learned to plow, to sow, to irrigate. Agriculture began, and with it, civilization was born. From small riverside villages, communities began to grow. They built canals, raised embankments, divided the water, and learned to live together. But to do that, they needed organization. They needed people who could plan, command, record, and measure. And so society emerged, No longer just groups of hunters, but structured communities with roles and shared memory. There were farmers, potters, priests who read the stars, and scribes who carved symbols into wet clay. Writing, humanity's most transformative invention, was born here. At first, it wasn't meant for storytelling, but for accounting. Who paid how much grain, who owed how many camels, who managed the storehouse. But over time, those clay symbols became the language of memory. People began to write about rain, about seasons, about gods, about kings, and eventually about themselves. For the first time in history, memory was no longer just sung or told. It was written. Time could pass, but the words would remain. Alongside writing came religion. The Sumerians watched the rivers rise, the rains fall, the floods sweep across the plains, and they felt the will of the gods in all of it. They built grand ziggurats, stepped temples reaching toward the heavens, bridges between mortals and the divine. In their minds, the world was still young, and the gods were those who had witnessed when the waters once covered the earth. Each flood was a reminder that humankind had nearly been erased, and only by honoring nature could they continue to live. In cities like Uruk, and Eridu, the first true cities on Earth, people built walls, gates, and streets aligned with the stars. They traded goods, measured time, wrote laws, and began to understand that they were doing something greater than themselves. They were shaping order from chaos. From the ashes of the Ice Age, from the memory of the Great Flood, humankind had learned the meaning of balance. They knew that water could both give life and destroy it. So they did not fight it. They learned to live with it. On the clay tablets found in Mesopotamia, ancient prayers can still be read. O river, rise in season, retreat in time. We are but grains of sand within your flow. These simple words carry a deep truth, that humanity had learned fear, but also reverence for the world around them. They had seen death, and because of that they understood the value of life. Looking back, we see that every civilization that followed, from Egypt to India, from China to the Andes, was born beside rivers. Perhaps that is because water was humanity's first memory. In the sound of flowing streams, people heard the earth's breath. In the floods, they remembered the ancient deluge. And in the fertile silt, they saw the promise of tomorrow. Mesopotamia was not just the birthplace of cities, it was the place where humanity first understood the meaning of staying. They were no longer wanderers through time, but keepers of it. There, humankind learned to build with brick, to plant in soil, and to raise memory upon the very ground that was once under water. And when night falls over the land between two rivers, one can almost imagine the flicker of firelight reflecting off wet clay tablets, the sounds of writing, of prayer, of water flowing, merging into one eternal rhythm. And in that moment, history truly began, and not with war, but with a season of water. After Mesopotamia awoke, the breath of civilization began to spread. Like rivers flowing from a shared source, other civilizations slowly rose, each with its own melody, yet all moving to the same rhythm, the rhythm of water, of memory, of rebirth after the age of ice. For wherever there was water, there was life, and wherever there was life, humanity began to write its story. To the west of Mesopotamia lay another land also shaped by water, Egypt. The Nile, the longest river on earth, flowed through the barren desert, carrying fertile soil from the Ethiopian highlands northward. Every year, when the waters rose, The ancient Egyptians did not fear or flee. They waited. They knew the flood was a gift, because when the waters receded, the land turned fertile again. They called this cycle Shait, the season of renewal. And in the rise and fall of the river, they saw the pattern of life and death itself. From that understanding came their faith in rebirth and the afterlife. They believed that, like the Nile, the soul did not vanish. It simply changed form. The Egyptians built pyramids not merely to honor their kings, but to mirror the order of the cosmos, a balance between earth and sky, between humankind and nature. They did not fear water because they understood that it was the pathway of the soul returning to its origin. The Nile was their lifeblood and also the deepest symbol of memory, that life, like water, is never still. Farther east, in a land surrounded by mountains and sea, another civilization blossomed, the Indus Valley civilization. There, people built cities of baked brick, complete with drains, public baths, and sewer systems so advanced they seemed centuries ahead of their time. The Indus River had two faces, gentle and fierce. In the rainy season, it brought water and silt. In the dry season, it withdrew, leaving fields ready for planting. When people learned its rhythm, they learned balance itself. No single god ruled absolutely. Instead, everything, water, earth, fire, wind, and spirit, was part of one great whole. Religion there had no name yet, but philosophy was already being born. Brahman, the cosmic soul from which all things arise and to which all things return. Perhaps the ancient people of India understood something modern humanity sometimes forgets, that every beginning comes from water, and every ending returns to it. In the wind along the Indus, perhaps they heard echoes of the drowned lands to the south, Sunderland, from which their ancestors may have fled when the seas rose. Farther still to the east, along the plains of the Yellow River, ancient China was beginning to find its voice. The river was wild, changing course, breaking its banks, but it also brought yellow silt, the lifeblood of millions. The Chinese called it the Mother of China, though at times they also called it China's sorrow. For when the river raged, countless villages vanished. Yet through that harshness they learned resilience. They built dikes, diverted water, kept records, measured seasons, and founded their first dynasties. From this, a new idea emerged, that humanity could live in harmony with nature, not merely endure it. Unlike the stillness of Egypt or the mysticism of India, Chinese civilization became a journey of adjustment. They believed that the order of the world was like the order of water. It must flow rightly, neither overflowing nor ceasing. When ancient rulers spoke of taming the waters, they meant not only the literal act of flood control, but also the moral duty to maintain balance between chaos and harmony. Every dynasty began with the mastery of water, and ended when the floods returned. For in ancient China, a river was never just a river. It was a test of virtue and the measure of human harmony with the cosmos. Seen from afar, these rivers, the Nile, the Tigris, the Euphrates, the Indus, and the Yellow River, appear like vast arteries carrying the shared memory of humankind. From melting ice to fertile silt, from flood to harvest, water became the universal language of civilization. Though separated by thousands of miles, people everywhere learned the same lesson, that life endures only when we move with the rhythm of water. For if ice is the memory of death, then rivers are the memory of life. Within each current flows the story of millions of years, of lost lands, and of those who once stood at the water's edge, gazing at the sky reflected upon its surface, realizing they were part of something far greater than themselves. And when the sun sets over the Nile, the Indus, or the Yellow River, the golden light upon the water gleams like the memory of a planet reborn. In that quiet glow, it feels as though all that was once carried away by the flood still drifts there, silently, within the breath of the rivers. When the rivers had settled and the land began to flourish, humanity lifted its eyes to the sky. After millions of years of looking down at ice, fire, stone, and soil, they finally began to look upward. The sky, vast and silent, had always been there. But only when humans learned to pause, to plant, to wait for the seasons, did they realize that the stars were not just decoration. They were a calendar, a compass, a record of time written in light. Each night, as the sun sank and darkness spread, the heavens unfolded like an endless scroll. The stars rose in the east, drifted slowly across the sky, and disappeared in the west. The first to notice this, the Egyptians by the Nile, the Sumerians in Mesopotamia, the Dravidians along the Indus, and the ancient Chinese by the Yellow River, all understood the same truth. The order of the sky reflected the order of the earth. If they could read the stars, they could know when floods would rise, when rains would return, and when it was time to sow their fields. And so astronomy was born, not from curiosity, but from the need to survive. The Sumerians were the first to map the constellations. They divided the sky into 12 zones, following the path of the sun through the year, what we now call the zodiac. Each zone was named after the shapes they saw above them: the bull, the lion, the archer, the fish. Not because they were bound by superstition, but because they believed heaven and earth were connected. When the stars brightened, the rivers swelled. When they vanished, the seasons turned. For them, watching the sky was another way of understanding the ground beneath their feet. In Egypt, people looked to Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky. Each year, when it appeared just before dawn, they knew the Nile was about to flood. It was not merely a celestial event. It was a promise. The waters would return and life would bloom again. From that rhythm, the Egyptian calendar was born. 365 days, just like ours. And in their hearts, Sirius was more than a star. It was the soul of the goddess Isis, whose tears, they believed, became the waters of the Nile that restored life to the world. In ancient India, sages gazed upward and composed the Vedanga Jyotisha, one of the oldest astronomical texts known to humanity. They saw how the movements of the moon, the stars, and the sun shaped the seasons, the tides, even human emotion. It was not superstition, but perception, the deep sense that humanity and the cosmos breathed in unison. During every ritual, they sang, chanted, counted the stars, and called each constellation by sacred syllables, as if every light in the sky was a memory carved in sound. In China, royal astronomers of the Xia and Shang dynasties climbed high towers to chart the heavens. They recorded eclipses, comets, and celestial alignments. To them, the sky was not just nature, it was mandate. When the stars shifted or the moon darkened, it was a sign that a ruler had lost the mandate of heaven. The keepers of the stars were, in truth, the keepers of time, recording history, not with ink, but with light. From east to west, people began to weave the stars into stories. Orion, the three bright stars forming a perfect belt, appeared in nearly every culture. In Egypt, it was Osiris, the god of resurrection. In Greece, it was Orion the hunter, lifted to the heavens by Zeus. In the Americas, it was the guardian of the harvest. Different names, different voices, yet the same sky and the same reflection of humanity reaching upward to understand itself. Perhaps when those early people stood beside their rivers and saw the stars mirrored on the water's surface, they understood that everything, earth, water, and sky, were layers of the same memory. When they looked upward, they did not just see the present heavens. They saw their past, the drowned lands, the lost cities, the ages of ice. The sky was the mirror of the earth, and every star a memory that never faded. From that yearning came astronomy, astrology, and religion, all born from the desire to rediscover what had been lost, to find in the order of the heavens the key to the chaos below. And perhaps what humankind truly sought was not the position of the stars, but its own place among them. Even now, when we look up at the night sky, through the haze of city lights, through drifting clouds, we still see those same stars. They haven't changed. They are the oldest, most enduring memories our eyes can still behold. Each light has traveled thousands of years to reach us, once shining upon the faces of our ancestors, and now upon ours. Perhaps when they look to the stars and when we do the same, we are seeing one and the same thing, separated only by time. And in the stillness of night, if we stand by a river and watch the heavens reflected in the water, we may understand at last why our ancestors called water the memory of the earth and the stars the memory of the soul. For when the two meet, that is where humanity remembers that it still belongs to the universe. From the first moment humanity learned to lift its gaze to the sky, they saw more than stars. They saw rhythm, a steady, repeating pulse. The sun rose and fell, the moon waxed and waned, stars appeared, vanished, and returned after a certain span. Amid a world in constant change, the sky was the one thing that held order. And in that order, humankind felt for the first time the meaning of time itself. Time was not an invention, it was a discovery. Long before clocks, time was measured by light and shadow, by seasons, by wind, by water. Each culture, each land sought to count the heartbeat of the universe, to know when to plant, when to harvest, when the floods would come, when the cold would return. Slowly, people realized that if they truly listened, they could read the rhythm of the earth. In Mesopotamia, the Sumerians observed the motions of the sun and moon to create the first known tables of time. They divided a solar cycle into 360 parts, not by chance, but because 360 could be evenly divided by many smaller numbers. From that came the 360-day year, the circle of 360 degrees, the hour of 60 minutes, and the minute of 60 seconds. It was the mark of Mesopotamia, the place where humans first turned the rhythm of the heavens into numbers, and even now, tens of thousands of years later, the world still counts time by that same system. In Egypt, they raised great stone pillars called obelisks to measure the sun's shadow through the day. When the shadow moved from west to east, they knew the hour. When it was shortest, the sun was at its height. When the moon rose beside the star Sirius, they knew the flood of the Nile was near. They divided the year into 3 seasons: flood, sowing, and harvest, the 3 chapters of life itself. To the Egyptians, measuring time was not about control, but about harmony. Every river, every temple, every crop was tied to the calendar, to the dance between earth and sky. In India, sages sat beside the Ganges, counting the rhythm of the moon. They spoke of the yugas, vast cycles of time through which the universe is born, grows, fades, and begins again. For them, time had no beginning or end. It was a circle. Just as a river never stops flowing, time never ceases to turn. Krita Yuga, Treta Yuga, Dvapara Yuga, Kali Yuga, 4 great ages, each shorter than the one before, until the world is cleansed by fire and water and reborn anew. In this philosophy, time was not an enemy, but the soul of the cosmos, eternal, returning, and ever new. In China, time was bound to nature's rhythm and moral order. The year was divided into 24 solar terms, the beginnings of spring, summer, autumn, and winter, each marking the Earth's subtle transformations. Farmers watched the moon, listened to birds, and felt the wind to know when to plant or harvest. Rulers used calendars to govern, for he who controlled time controlled the seasons, and thus life itself. Yet in Chinese thought, time was not a straight line but a wheel in motion. To live in harmony with nature was to move in rhythm with that turning wheel. Across Europe, people who lived near the sea raised massive stone circles like Stonehenge. The stones were aligned with the sunrise of the solstices, tracing the sun's path through the year. No one knows who they were, but they surely understood the sky more deeply than we imagine. To build Stonehenge, they must have watched the stars and the sun for generations. It was not only an observatory, it was a symphony of time written in stone. From all these cultures, humanity learned one profound truth. Time does not pass through us. We move within it. Every breath, every season, every day is a note in the grand symphony of the universe. By counting, recording, carving, and singing, our ancestors did more than measure time. They found themselves within it. Today we have atomic clocks precise to the billionth of a second. Yet when we look at the round face of a clock, we are still gazing upon the same symbol the Sumerians once drew. When we say hour, minute, or second, we still speak their language. Perhaps deep down, humanity has never stopped counting, because counting time is our way of touching the infinite. And if you sit still on a night without engines or noise, with only the wind and your heartbeat, you might hear what our ancestors once heard: the sound of time. Not the sound of it passing, but of it living. For in that cosmic symphony, each of us is a single, fleeting note, rising, fading, and leaving behind a resonance that joins the music of the universe. From the very beginning, the sea was a thing of fear, an endless expanse of water, vast, cold, and dark, where the line between life and death could be erased by a single wave. But it was also the same sea that had swallowed ancient lands and guarded the memories of long-lost civilizations, that became the first mirror in which humankind saw itself. For only when we stand before the infinite do we begin to feel the limits of our own existence. When the ice melted and the oceans rose, humanity slowly returned to the sea. At first, it was with simple rafts, drifting close to shore, just far enough to cross a river, a bay, or reach a nearby island. But over time, they realized that the sea was not a wall, it was a road. Every wave led somewhere new, and every gust of wind carried the promise of the unknown. The first brave souls who stepped onto their boats carried not just food and tools, but questions, wondering if, across that horizon, others like them might exist. In Southeast Asia, people took to the waters very early. The ancient inhabitants of Sunderland, when their homeland sank beneath the rising seas, followed the wind and currents outward. They reached new islands, Java, Borneo, the Philippines, and farther still to Melanesia and Polynesia. They had no maps, no compasses, only memory and the sky. They navigated by stars, listened to the song of the waves to measure distance, and felt the wind with their skin. Each voyage was a silent conversation between humankind and the ocean, where one small mistake could mean everything was lost. In the Mediterranean, the Phoenicians learned to read the sea by the color of its waters and the scent of its winds. They built ships from cedar wood, light yet strong, able to travel farther than any before them. They carried not only goods, but writing, language, and memory. Wherever their feet touched a new shore, a light was kindled, a city was born, a story began. From Tyre to Carthage, from Byblos to Gibraltar, the sea ceased to be a boundary. It became the thread that bound civilizations together. In the east, the ancient Chinese also began to face the ocean. They called it the Donghai, the Eastern Sea, a place both sacred and terrifying. In old writings, the sea was the realm of immortals, where heaven and earth met. Yet it was also a mirror, a place for reflection. When they looked upon the waves, they saw impermanence. They understood that every empire, no matter how great, would one day be like sea foam, glimmering for a moment before dissolving into nothing. The sea taught humanity about limits. Even with ships, compasses, and the knowledge of stars, people still bowed before its power. Every storm, every wave was a reminder that no one commands the ocean. Only those who listen survive. Yet in that surrender, humankind found something extraordinary, the sense that we are not alone. For when they looked into the water, they saw reflections of the sky, of the earth, and of themselves. Perhaps that is why nearly every civilization has seen the sea as the mirror of the soul. The Greeks spoke of Poseidon, a god of both fury and mercy. The Japanese told of Ryujin, the dragon king of the deep, keeper of the tides and the rain. The Polynesians called the ocean their mother, the place where all souls return after death. And somewhere deep within humanity's collective memory, the sea became a symbol of remembrance, of what was lost but never forgotten. Today, when we stand at the shore and look out over the sea, we are gazing into the planet's oldest mirror. Beneath those waves lie mountain ranges that were once continents, the ruins of temples, the pathways of our ancestors. The ocean reflects not only light, but memory. Each wave that breaks upon the sand is a pulse of time, the rhythm of the earth still breathing. And if you stand there long enough, you might hear what our ancestors once heard. The wind howling through sails, the creak of wood beneath pressure, and deep below the whispers of history. For the sea does not only keep the bones of ships and coral, it keeps the soul of humankind itself. The wanderers who have always sought their way home across waves through memory and through the depths of their own being. Because in the end, when we look upon the sea, we do not just see the world, We see ourselves within it, small yet everlasting. Before humanity could read the sky, carve words, or sail the seas, they had already learned to bow before the mountains, not because of their height, but because of what they held within. Fire. The silent fire beneath the ground, sleeping for centuries, only to awaken and tear the earth open, painting a second sky with ash. Since the dawn of time, people have known this truth. If the sea is the memory of water, then the volcano is the memory of the earth. And when it speaks, no one dares interrupt. After the Ice Age, as the world grew warmer, the crust of the planet began to move. Massive plates of land, once pressed down by ice for millions of years, now rose, cracked, and shifted. From the deep came fire, mountains were born, and humankind witnessed a vision both terrifying and sacred, life reborn from death. It was no coincidence that every ancient civilization had a god of fire, for they understood that fire was not only a force of destruction, but also of creation. In the Mediterranean stood an island called Santorini. 16 centuries before the birth of Christ, it was home to the radiant Minoan civilization. Then one day, the mountain at its heart exploded. The eruption was so immense that the sky turned black. Ash rained across the world, and waves as tall as cliffs erased everything in their path. Many believe this cataclysm gave birth to the legend of Atlantis, the city swallowed by the sea. But perhaps deeper than myth lies memory. The human memory of watching the earth itself grow angry and learning that nothing endures forever. Farther east, along the Anatolian range, civilizations like the Hittites, Phrygians, and later the Lydians built their cities around lands of fire. They knew the soil near volcanoes was the most fertile, yet also the most dangerous. They prayed, offered sacrifices, carved the names of their gods into stone, a fragile negotiation with nature itself. For they knew that fire needed only a breath to consume the world, yet if respected, it would bless them with abundance. In Asia, volcanoes were seen as the dwelling places of the divine. In Japan, Mount Fuji, Fujisan, was called the Mountain of the Soul. It was not feared, but revered as a symbol of purity, of the ascent between earth and sky. Each year, thousands climbed its slopes, not to conquer it, but to listen. They believed that when the mountains slept, the earth rested, and when it breathed, the universe renewed itself. Across Indonesia, the Pacific Ring of Fire has always been a place where life and death intertwine. Krakatoa, Tambora, Merapi, Toba. These names are not merely mountains, but milestones in time. When Toba erupted some 75,000 years ago, it blanketed the planet in ash, cooling the world and plunging humanity into peril. Some scientists believe it nearly ended our species, that only a few thousand humans survived. If that is true, then perhaps within each of us flows the blood of those who lived through that roar. Volcanoes teach us of cycles, of destruction and renewal, not as opposites, but as parts of the same motion. When a mountain erupts, it kills forests, but it also creates new land. When ash buries cities, it also enriches the soil for the generations to come. The fire beneath the earth is like memory within the human heart. We think it has cooled, but a single spark can awaken it again, burning bright, fierce, and alive. People have always lived near mountains, yet never truly left them. In Italy, Pompeii stands as witness. When Mount Vesuvius erupted in the year 79, the city vanished beneath ash. And yet centuries later, when it was uncovered, every home, every gesture, every face remained, as if time itself had paused, holding its breath. In those ashes, one can see both tragedy and beauty, the proof that humanity is not immortal, but memory can be. Perhaps that is why our ancestors believed the mountains had souls, the souls of the earth, of the past, of all things that never truly fade. When they lit their fires, they were echoing that same breath. When they saw smoke rise from the summit, they did not see fear, they saw kinship. For that flame, no matter how fierce, was the same fire that once burned within them, the fire of life, of memory, of the will to continue. Today, we watch volcanoes through telescopes, seismographs, and data streams. But perhaps if we were to stand still at the foot of one, we might still hear what the ancients once heard, the whisper of the earth itself, slow, deep, enduring, like a story that has never truly ended. There are places on Earth where time seems to have stopped breathing, not because they were forgotten, but because they were preserved in ash, in sand, in stone, in the heat of one fateful moment. In those places, people, houses, voices, and gazes all turned to stone together, as if the world froze for a single second and then fell silent for thousands of years. And when they were found again, they did not tell stories of triumph, but of interruption, of lives paused midway. In the year 79 after Christ, the city of Pompeii in Italy was living one of its most ordinary days. The chatter of markets, the creak of cartwheels, the clink of wine cups, the laughter of children under the sun. Then suddenly the ground shook, the sky darkened, and a sound like the tearing of the world itself filled the air. Mount Vesuvius awoke. Ash, gas, and molten rock poured down upon the city. Within hours, everything was buried beneath a suffocating night. And then, silence. A silence that lasted nearly 2,000 years. When Pompeii was unearthed in the 18th century, people did not just find ruins. They found time itself. The walls still stood, bread still sat on tables, and the people, caught in their final gestures, were frozen between life and death. But Pompeii was not alone. More than 1,000 years before it, on the island of Santorini in Greece, there was another city, Akrotiri. It too was buried beneath volcanic ash. But unlike Pompeii, its people seemed to have escaped. No bodies were ever found. Only homes, frescoes, pottery, and paved streets remained. Akrotiri was a Pompeii without death, a city that preserved the memory of life rather than the memory of loss. There, the ash did not only bury, it preserved light itself. Farther east, in the Indus Valley, stood another forgotten city, Mohenjo-Daro. When it was uncovered in the early 20th century, archaeologists were astonished. Streets ran straight and wide, houses had their own drainage, there were even public baths. Everything spoke of order, cleanliness, and refinement. And then disappearance. No war, no fire, no trace of invasion, only silence, as if its people had quietly departed one night, leaving their city to sand and wind. Some believe climate change, shifting rivers, or drought forced them to leave. Yet whatever the reason, Mohenjo-Daro remains like a question carved in stone, a memory that refuses to explain itself. Across the ocean in the Americas there was Teotihuacan, the city of the gods. There stood the pyramid of the sun, the pyramid of the moon, and vast avenues as straight as arrows. When the Aztecs arrived, The city had already been abandoned for centuries. They did not know who built it or why it was left behind. They only knew it was too great, too ancient, too sacred to be of man. So they named it the place where humans became gods. Perhaps it was also the place where humanity learned that no monument, no matter how grand, lasts forever, that all greatness eventually turns to dust. Strangely, in all these buried cities, though scattered across ages and continents, we feel the same thing: stillness. Not death, but pause. As if the earth itself, for a moment, wished to hold on to these scenes for the future, so that those who came later, when kneeling before the ashes and the stones, would not just see ruins, but see themselves reflected there. For within each layer of ash there is breath, fear, love, and life, all dissolved together and fossilized. These cities remind us that memory does not need to be spoken. It can live in walls, in the curve of a vase, in the shadow of a person caught in motion. Time can take away voices, but not presence. For once, memory is written into matter. It never truly vanishes. It only waits to be seen again. Today, when we walk through Pompeii or stand upon the steps of Teotihuacan, the wind still moves through the old stones. And in that wind, if we listen long enough, we may hear something, not the voice of the past, but the voice of time itself, telling its story. For ash is not merely what remains. It is the earth's memory, written in the last breath of an ordinary day. And perhaps that is why, even after thousands of years, people still return to these places, not to mourn what was lost, but to remember that once, for one fleeting moment, everything was alive. From ashes and ancient stone, humanity has pieced together the shapes of lost cities. But to understand itself, its origins, its journey, its memory, stretching across millions of years, it had to look deeper than bones and ruins. Not into libraries or temples, but into the body itself. For within every human cell lies an ancient record, a manuscript of time written in blood. Each gene is a line of text, each strand of DNA a paragraph. Together they tell the story that history forgot, the story of the first footsteps, of wanderers crossing ice and sea, and of the many times the earth nearly erased everything, only to begin again. In our blood flows the memory of fire, of wind, of water, and of those who once faced them all. Through science, we have learned to read that hidden language. The strands of DNA, seemingly silent, recount with perfect precision what legends could only suggest. They reveal that all of us trace our roots to a small group in Africa, around 200,000 years ago. From there they spread outward, scattered across the world, following melting ice, shifting deserts, and the pulse of climate. Each migration birthed a new branch of blood. And though the river divided into many streams, its source remained one. As humans left Africa, they met others, the Neanderthals, the Denisovans, and perhaps still other ancient cousins whose names are lost to time. They did not only fight, they mingled. In the genes of every modern person lies a trace of them, a mark of those brief moments when branches of humanity intertwined. Those bloodlines merged and flowed silently through thousands of generations, an unbroken current of memory. The Neanderthals of Europe carried the strength of ice and the endurance of cold. The Denisovans of Asia carried genes that adapted to thin air, a gift still present in the blood of the Sherpa people of the Himalayas. And modern humans, with imagination and creativity, carried both lineages further, blending them into the vast diversity of humankind. Perhaps our survival was never about strength, but about connection, about learning to carry the memory of others within ourselves. Every land left its mark upon human blood. The genes of northern peoples bear the shadow of the ancient ice. Those of Southeast Asia carry whispers of sunken worlds, the descendants of Sunderland. Native Americans still hold the imprint of ancestors who once crossed the Bering Land Bridge when the two continents were one. And the islanders of the Pacific preserve the traces of those who once navigated the seas by the stars. DNA is a map, not of borders, but of memory. When scientists connect millions of genetic fragments from across the globe, they see a strange pattern, not of boundaries or pure lines, but of swirling circles of mingling. It surprises many to realize that humanity's true history is not written in straight lines, but in overlapping spirals. There is no us and them. There is only us, in countless forms. And when we look into our genes, we see not just a journey, but memory itself. Studies show that some human genes carry echoes of fear, of hunger, even of disaster, meaning that memory does not live only in the mind, it lives in the blood. Perhaps when we dream of the sea, of mountains, or of places we have never seen, it is not imagination, but an echo from our ancestors, from recollections carried quietly within our cells. Strange, isn't it? That when we speak of origins, we look outward, to the earth, the sky, the ruins, while the answer has always been within. Each of us is a living monument carrying fragments of ages long past. That we cannot recall them in words, our bodies remember. And through the act of living, we continue that story, not written in stone, but in breath. Today, as science deciphers the code of every human genome, we no longer see only difference, we see unity. Though our skin tones, languages, and lands may differ, we all carry the same ancient memory of journey, of water, of ice, of the first fire. We are the children of that same flame, the flame that endured 2 million years of wind, storm, and flood, and still burns quietly within our blood. And perhaps that is what makes us human. We do not remember only with our minds, but with our very existence. When the earth finally calmed after the long chaos of ice and fire, humanity began to move again. No longer fleeing rising waters or blizzards. Now they travelled in search of something: food, metals, salt, gems, knowledge, and even spirit. The first roads were not drawn. They were walked into existence. And with every step, over thousands of years, humans wove the first map of the world. At first, they were nothing more than trails. Hunters followed game, herders followed their flocks, traders followed the seasons. Over time, these trails became paths. The path became memory, something invisible, yet more enduring than stone. For every road, no matter how small, is a mark carved into the earth. A quiet declaration that people had walked, lived, and connected. In West Asia, across deserts and stone mountains, the first trade routes were born. They linked Mesopotamia to Egypt, then stretched toward the Indus Valley. Along them flowed gold, silver, spices, and gems. But not only goods, ideas, stories, languages, beliefs. Slowly, these routes became the arteries of civilization. As cities grew, humanity began to fix these paths into the landscape. From China came the Silk Road, not just a network of trade, but a thread weaving together east and west. Along that road travelled silk, jade, porcelain, and precious stones. But far more valuable were the ideas exchanged: philosophy, religion, astronomy, medicine, and music. Every caravan that passed, every merchant who told a story, became a heartbeat in the great dialogue between civilizations. Along the Silk Road, oases like Samarkand, Bukhara, and Kashgar shone like lanterns in the desert. By night, they glowed with firelight and song. Persians, Arabs, Chinese, Indians, and Greeks met there. They spoke in different tongues, but all understood the language of travelers: trade, curiosity, and respect. There, people learned that borders are only illusions. Farther south, across the sea, another network emerged: the spice route. From Indonesia, India, and Arabia, merchants sailed across oceans carrying cinnamon, pepper, nutmeg, things small, yet more valuable than gold. They brought not only goods, but the rhythm of the sea itself. The monsoon became their companion, the stars their compass. These maritime routes were the silk roads of water, where the memory of the ocean met the memory of humankind. In Africa, caravans crossed the Sahara on the backs of camels, carrying salt, gold, and news between Timbuktu, Gao, and Cairo. Each grain of salt traded was more than material. It was a message that even through sand and wind, humans could still find their way to one another. And in Europe, the Roman Empire carved its own great network of stone roads, viae stretching from Britain to Syria. They said all roads lead to Rome, but perhaps more truly, all roads lead to the shared memory of humankind, the invisible crossroads where we have always met. The ancient roads carried more than goods. They carried souls. Along them, the world's great religions spread and intertwined. Buddhism followed the footsteps of monks from India to China and Japan. Christianity traveled west with the Romans. Islam crossed deserts with the caravans. Each faith, each philosophy moved by land, by sea, by word of mouth. And through them, humanity began to share not only wealth, but belief. Every road, whether of stone or salt, land or wave, has one truth in common. It does not only connect places, it connects time. It links the past to the present, the dream to the destination. A road is the physical trace of longing. No road is eternal, yet its meaning never fades. Even when buried in sand, hidden by forest, or swallowed by tide, the spirit of the road endures. In the blood of the traveller, in the eyes of those who wait. Today we fly through the sky, moving on wings of metal and wind, yet if you look down, you can still see the faint scars of the old ones, winding lines through desert, forest, and mountain. They are the wrinkles of the earth, the marks of its age, the memories of civilization itself. And when you walk a modern road, whether you know it or not, you are walking in the footsteps of those who came thousands of years before. Perhaps that is why humankind in every age keeps moving. Deep down, we do not travel only to arrive, we travel to remember. To feel that we belong to a journey far older than history itself. There was a moment in history when humankind realized that it no longer merely lived with nature. It had begun to create a nature of its own. When night fell and the sky lit up with stars, people kindled their own fires upon the ground, and those small flames fragile yet bright, reflected the heavens above. That was when the first cities were born. Once, humanity passed through the world. Now, it chose to stay. They found a place with river, soil, and wind, then drove the first wooden stake into the earth, the mark of settlement. From that point, they raised walls, built houses, opened roads, and, without knowing it, recreated the sky on the surface of the world. Every home became a star, every street a constellation, every square a small heaven. The city, child of civilization, was not born from stone or clay alone, but from the collective memory of humankind, the memory of light in the dark. The first city remembered by history was Uruk in Mesopotamia. There, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, people built vast walls stretching for miles, enclosing tens of thousands of lives, something the world had never seen before. Uruk was more than a place to live, it was a symbol. At its heart stood the temple of Inanna, goddess of love and war, like the pulse of the city itself. From Uruk came writing, trade, and law. And in each sun-baked brick, humanity inscribed its dream of eternity. At night, the fires of Uruk glowed against the tall walls, their light shimmering on the river's surface. Perhaps to its earliest inhabitants, the sight of the city from afar looked like a constellation rising from the ground. And from that moment, humanity began to feel that it had touched something beyond nature, a kind of immortality built by hand. From Uruk the light spread. In Egypt, Thebes and Memphis rose along the Nile, each bound to a temple, a god, a rhythm of life. Thebes, the city of pharaohs, of ritual and stone tombs, where the soul was guided to the heavens through pyramids, artificial mountains pointing to the stars. Farther east, Babylon shimmered like a dream, its blue-glazed gates, its legendary hanging gardens, and the Tower of Babel, the symbol of mankind's reach toward the divine. When the Babylonians saw that tower mirrored in the water, they beheld a sky within the earth. Still farther east, along the great rivers of China, cities such as Anyang, Luoyang, and Chang'an emerged. Chang'an, meaning eternal peace, embodied the oldest dream of civilization, to find a place where time was no longer an enemy. The city was designed along cosmic lines divided by the rising and setting of the sun, a living reflection of the universe itself. A city was not merely a shelter, it was the shape of collective memory. Within every road, every wall, every kiln lay traces of cooperation, a promise whispered between people, we will live together. If the ice had taught humanity how to survive, the city taught it how to coexist. And so they learned a new truth. Memory could live not only in objects, but in space, in the way we breathe, build, and dream together. But every light brings its shadow. As cities grew, so did division. Walls built for protection became borders. Fire kindled for warmth became a symbol of power. The city, like humankind, learned to love, to fear, to desire. It gained a soul, but also ambition. And while the stars above kept their order, the lights below began to compete for brightness. Yet one thing has never changed. When night falls, people still look up at the sky, then back at their cities, and realize that both stars and fires are born from the same source, a source ancient and quiet, burning within the human heart since those long, cold nights when ancestors gathered around the hearth, telling stories of gods and vanished lands. Today, when we look down from the sky at the sweep of city lights glittering like a galaxy upon the earth, Perhaps the planet is seeing itself through human eyes. Each light is a memory, a breath, a human star burning in the cosmos. And in that moment, the ground and the heavens become one, where the memory of nature and the memory of humankind meet, shining together in the dark. For perhaps a city is nothing more than humanity's way of telling the universe, we are still here, still burning, still dreaming. Ever since humankind first learned to make fire, the world has never been the same. But it was only when we learned to keep the fire that the true miracle began. To hold it, to feed it, to make it burn hotter, until it could melt stone itself. And when the first bright stream of molten metal flowed from the rock, humans realized they had touched the power of the Earth's very heart. That was when fire ceased to be just light and became a tool. From ash and heat, a new era was born, the age of metal. Copper was the first metal humans learned to tame. They found it hidden in stone, glinting faintly under the sun. When heated, it softened, easy to shape, glowing like sunset. From it, they forged blades, sickles, bowls, bells, and statues. Metal carried a voice, the light ring of a hammer's strike, the long hum of its vibration. For the first time, humankind heard the earth speaking through its own hands, and they understood that through forging they could reshape not just metal, but the world itself. The earliest civilizations rose to greatness not only through soil and water, but through metal. In the rugged lands of Anatolia, the Hittites discovered how to smelt iron before anyone else, ushering in a new epoch, the Iron Age. Their weapons were harder, sharper, more enduring. Bronze maces gave way to iron swords. When blades clashed, the sound changed, deeper, heavier, colder. It was the sound of a new world, one of organized war and of power drawn from the earth's core. Yet metal was never only for destruction. In Egypt and Mesopotamia, artisans cast bells and instruments that made the elements sing. The ringing of bronze filled temples and rituals like the voice of the divine. People believed that sound opened the gates between worlds, between human and God, life and death. When the bronze pillars sang in the wind, they heard the breath of the earth itself. In ancient India, copper and tin were blended to create bronze, strong, luminous, eternal. The bronze statues of Shiva Nataraja, the cosmic dancer, were not mere works of art. They were symbols of existence, where fire, earth, and human hands became one. Each sculpture was a hymn in metal, a song about the eternal rhythm of creation. In China, bronze reached perfection. Ritual vessels, bells, and swords were covered with carvings, symbols, and prayers. They were more than tools. They were memories cast in metal, recording names of kings, ancestors, and events that stone had not yet told. When one strikes an ancient Chinese bell, its echo rings low and deep. The voice of centuries speaking across time. Metal stood between humankind and nature. Born of the earth, refined by fire and shaped by hand, it was a bridge between the world below and the will above. In mastering it, people refined themselves, learning patience, focus, and respect for heat, for limits, for transformation. Each hammer strike upon the anvil shaped not only the metal, but the maker's spirit. The age of metal was also the age of sound. The ring of hammers, the hiss of forges, the clash of blades, the toll of bells. Together, they formed humanity's first symphony of industry. Close your eyes and you can almost hear it. The steady rhythm of the hammer echoing through the night, blending with wind and water. It was the sound of humankind remaking the world, a music not written in notes, but in the heartbeat of fire. And like all things in history, every creation carried two faces. With tools came weapons, with invention came war. Cities rose and fell, kingdoms were forged and broken. Metal, the child of fire, had no morality. It merely reflected the hands that held it. And perhaps that is why it remains both sacred and terrifying. When night descended, the blacksmiths banked their forges. The embers still glowed faintly in the ash. They knew that by morning the fire would rise again, just like history, burning out, then rekindling. And within each spark was the shadow of humankind, small but steadfast, continuing its endless journey, carrying the song of metal and the breath of the earth. For perhaps everything we have ever made, of stone, bronze, or iron, is simply our way of saying one thing, that humankind, fragile as it may be, is still strong enough to make the earth sing. Before religion, there was belief, not in gods with names or faces, but in the living rhythm of the world itself. Every flicker of light, every breath of wind, every wave carried meaning. When lightning struck, people heard the voice of the sky. When rain fell, they felt the compassion of the earth. When the moon changed shape, they saw time passing. To them, the world was not inert. It was alive, aware, and watching back. And from that awareness, gods were born. Not from imagination, but from gratitude and awe before the vastness of the universe. As the first civilizations rose, humanity began to name the forces surrounding them. In Mesopotamia, they saw thunder and called it the voice of Enlil, god of the wind. When the rivers swelled, it was the blessing of Enki, god of water. And each sunrise was the light of Utu, god of justice. These deities were not distant. They were present in everything people could touch, in storm, in soil, in rain. People prayed not to be saved, but to be heard, like a child speaking to a parent, or a species speaking to its planet. In Egypt, the divine became the soul of order. They believed the world was born from Nun, the primordial ocean, from which Ra, the sun god, emerged to bring light. When Ra ascended, day began. When he sank into the underworld, night fell. Each cycle was eternal. And within that rhythm, the Egyptians found philosophy. To live was to move in harmony with nature, not against it. The gods did not grant wishes, they preserved balance. If balance was broken, floods came, droughts followed, the world faltered. For them, morality and nature were one, two sides of the same cosmic rhythm. Farther east, ancient India saw the universe as a dance. Shiva Nataraja, the cosmic dancer, created and destroyed, began and ended, all in one eternal motion. In every movement of his hands was a star, in every turn a cycle of existence. The Indians did not see gods as static figures, but as movement itself. To them, the divine was everywhere, breath, in heartbeat, in the sound of a temple bell. The universe was not apart from humanity, nor humanity from the universe. Tat tvam asi, thou art that, was their oldest truth, a declaration of oneness between the human and the divine. In China, gods were not shaped as statues, but as principles. Heaven and earth, yin and yang, the five elements, each carried its own spirit. Thunder was the dragon's roar, wind the sky's breath, water the earth's veins. The divine did not rule, it harmonized, and to live rightly, one had to live in accord with nature's way, not to push, not to force, not to resist. The unity of heaven and humanity became a quiet faith, where man and sky differed in form, but not in essence. Far to the west, the Greeks and Romans gave their gods human shape. They did not imagine perfection, but reflection, a mirror of their own beauty and flaws. Zeus, Hera, Athena, Poseidon, each god embodied a fragment of the human psyche, projected onto the heavens to be understood. Their gods could love, rage, envy, forgive, just as they did. Thus, Greco-Roman religion was more than worship. It was a dialogue between humanity and its own soul, played out in the language of myth and sky. Everywhere on earth, in every tongue, people sought the same thing, meaning amid chaos. When they looked at the stars, they saw gods. When they looked at the ground, they saw the spirits of their ancestors. And when they looked within, they saw the thread connecting both. Faith, in all its forms, was never about fear. It was about memory. It was how humanity remembered what was greater than itself, things it could not hold, yet could feel in its bones. Today, when we speak of religion, philosophy, or cosmology, we may think we have evolved beyond that ancient need. But when night falls and we lift our eyes to the stars, we are doing exactly what our ancestors did tens of thousands of years ago, reaching for a glimmer of light in the dark. Perhaps we have never truly left them, and if all the ancient gods could still speak, perhaps they would whisper, "I am not far away. I am the earth beneath your feet, the breath within your chest, the fire in your eyes when you look toward the horizon." Perhaps in all of human history there has never been a moment so small yet so immense as when humankind first uttered a sound that carried meaning. It wasn't the cry of wind or beast or rain. It was the voice of a soul wanting to be heard, understood, named. In that instant, the silent world found rhythm. Grass, water, fire, sky, all were given names. And from that naming, the greatest miracle began. Humanity began to speak, and the world began to mean something. Before language, there were only cries, laughter, and tears. Yet among those raw sounds, rhythm began to emerge. When someone pointed toward water, they uttered na, ne, or nu. When they called to kin, they shaped breath into sounds like wind or heartbeat. No one taught them. They simply felt that voice was a bridge, invisible yet real, linking one mind to another. And once that bridge was built, humankind was no longer alone. Language was born not from intellect, but from emotion. The ancients spoke to call, to remember, to love, to fear. They did not know they were crafting the most powerful tool of time. For once something is named, it can no longer be swallowed by forgetting. A name is how humans keep what would otherwise vanish. To speak is an act of remembrance. Each word is a thread binding the present to what once was. As people scattered across the world, their languages divided and evolved in different directions. Yet strangely, certain sounds remained the same. Ma for mother, pa for father. From Africa to India, from Europe to the Americas, every child uttered these same syllables. Perhaps because before speech was language, it was breath, the sound of life itself, spoken in the dark when one human found another. Language became the vessel of collective memory. From spoken tales came myth, from myth, history. And when writing appeared, memory became immortal. The Sumerians carved the first symbols into clay, not to tell stories, but to record grain, debt, oaths. Yet from those small marks the world entered a new age, the age of memory written down. The first lines of writing were extensions of the voice, each character a heartbeat of memory, each text a song of time. When the Egyptians wrote in hieroglyphs, they preserved not only sounds but images, each word a picture, the eye of Ra, a bird, a river. Writing for them was sacred. To carve a symbol into stone was to give it eternal life. In the East, writing was seen as a reflection of cosmic order. The ancient Chinese believed Wen, written form, was the shadow of heaven itself. Every stroke had to flow with breath, with energy, with intention. In India, Sanskrit was called the language of the gods, each syllable a vibration of divine power. They believed the universe was not built by hands but by sound. Om, the first and final tone, the sound of existence. But language also divided. As tribes grew, their words changed. They spoke differently, wrote differently, heard differently. The bridge that once united them became a boundary. Yet even so, every language shared a single origin, the longing to reveal what lives inside. When the Greeks said logos, they meant not just word, but meaning, reason, essence. When the Indians said mantra, they meant not only chant, but the sound of the mind. And every time we speak, we echo those first voices that once broke the silence of the earth. Today, more than 7,000 languages are spoken, each one a world, a way of seeing, a spiritual map. When a language dies, not only do its words vanish, an entire vision of the universe disappears. But when someone learns a new tongue, even a single word, they awaken a stream of sleeping memory. And if you think about it, language is the one soul humanity truly shares. When you say mother is sky, water, or earth, you speak sounds that have been spoken millions of times before you. They belong to no one and to everyone. Perhaps it is through language that the memory of the Ice Age, of fire, of water, of the drowned lands, still lives within us. Because each time we tell a story, we are doing what our ancestors once did, keeping memory from fading into silence. And so no matter how time flows or tongues change, one thing remains: the voice. For as long as there is someone to tell and someone to listen, memory will live on. When language grew strong enough to tell and memory grew too full to carry, humankind began to do what it still does today. It told stories. Yet among those stories, some began to fade, while others, though never written, endured forever. These are called myths. Myths are where memory transforms. No longer mere events, but symbols. No longer moments in time, but echoes. No longer history, but whispers of things that never truly died. From the moment humanity learned to fear, it also learned to tell. Every storm, every flood, every falling star became a story. When a city was swallowed by water, the survivors carried more than sorrow. They carried the tale. And when they told it to their children, and their children to theirs, it became legend, then myth, then faith. The memory dissolved, but its spirit remained. Across the world runs a single shared memory of a great flood, From the epic of Gilgamesh in Sumer, to Noah in the Bible, to Manu in India, to Deucalion in Greece, every tale speaks of rising waters, a vessel, and a new beginning. Many call it coincidence. But perhaps it is humanity's deepest recollection of melting ice, of drowned lands, of those who survived when the old world vanished. They told their stories not only to remember, but to believe that life could begin again. Likewise, Plato's legend of Atlantis, a radiant island swallowed in a single night, is not just imagination. It is a symbol of lost civilizations, of cities consumed by the sea, of memories lying beneath the ocean floor. Plato did not describe a place but a fear that when humans grow too proud, nature reclaims all. And perhaps deep within the collective mind, Atlantis never vanished. For it is the metaphor of a cycle: birth, rise, fall, and rebirth. In India, the epics Mahabharata and Ramayana are more than tales of gods and kings. They are memories of another world, one where knowledge, war, and morality coexisted in mystical balance. When they spoke of weapons that flew through the air or rays of destructive light, perhaps they were not describing technology, but memory. Memories of things that once were, now gone, leaving only resonance in imagination. In Europe, the Norse spoke of Ragnarök, the end of the world, when the sun fades, the seas rise, and fire devours all. The Aztecs told of the 5 suns, each a world that lived and perished in turn. The Polynesians told of ancestral lands now beneath the sea. Different continents, distant peoples, yet every story says the same. The world has died before, and it will be born again. Myth is how humanity remembers with its soul. When history forgets, myth remembers. History records dates. Myth records feeling. History says it happened. Myth says it still lives. When a story survives long enough, it no longer needs proof, for it becomes true within the memory of those who tell it. And that is why myth never grows old. It evolves, changes form, changes name, but never disappears. Today we speak of ancient myths as metaphor, as literature. But perhaps some of them are fragments of real history, shrouded by the mist of time. Maybe beneath the ocean, ruins still sleep, and in the dreams of humankind, the faces of those who came before still linger. For once memory becomes myth, it cannot be erased. It only hides, waiting to be remembered. Perhaps that is why, no matter how far technology advances, we still tell stories. Deep down, storytelling is an act of existence. When we tell, we keep the world alive. Once more, when we listen, we become part of the bloodline of memory. And in that moment, we are not merely listeners. We are participants, stretching from the Ice Age to now. Because perhaps myth was never fiction at all. It is only memory, too old to be called history, and too real to be called a dream. If we listen long enough, not with our ears but with our hearts, we'll realize that the earth is still speaking. Not in words, but in its slow, steady rhythm. Waves crashing, winds moving, ice melting, the ground shifting. What we call history is only a brief echo in the endless symphony of this planet. Every civilization, every flame, every prayer, each is a single note in that grand song, rising, fading, yet never truly gone. 2 million years of migration, survival, and rebirth, all to teach humanity one quiet truth. We have never really left the place we began. Ice melts, seas rise, lands sink, and still everything begins again from ash and from memory. The first people who crossed the glaciers carried the fire of life within them and passed it on to the world. From the dark of the caves to the cities shining like constellations, humanity has always been the same, still walking, still seeking, still dreaming of a tomorrow that has not yet come. Beneath the ancient ice, remnants remain. Footprints, spears, fragments of bone, grains of pollen. They do not speak, yet we understand, for within their silence lies an older language, the language of continuity. Ice does not just preserve shape, it preserves time. Each frozen layer is a page in the planet's book, where even a single grain of dust carries the breath of worlds long gone. And beneath the oceans, where sunlight can no longer reach, lie forgotten cities. Temples buried, roads flattened by time, walls cracked, yet still bearing the shape of human hands. When divers first saw them, they said it felt like looking into a mirror of history. For everything that once stood on land eventually finds its reflection beneath the sea. We have walked through ice and fire, across deserts and rivers of time, through words, myths, and memories. And at the end of this journey we realize history is not what has passed. It is what still lives beside us, still breathes within us. Every stone, every drop of water, every grain of dust on your hand was once part of that story. We have simply forgotten how to listen. When we gaze at the night sky, we are looking into the past. The light of those stars began its journey thousands, even millions of years ago, and only now reaches our eyes. Perhaps memory works the same way, never lost, only delayed. And perhaps in every dream, in every flicker of déjà vu, a fragment of that ancient memory is finding its way home. Maybe the world we live in now is only the latest version of those that came before, reborn, refined, continued. The sunken kingdoms did not vanish, they changed form, from stone to soil, from people to ideas. The universe never erases, it writes over itself like a scroll without end. And if there is one message in these 2 million years, it may be this. Humanity was not created to rule, but to remember. We exist to listen to the earth, to hold its memories of what has been, and to pass them on to what will come. Today, when we look into the deep ocean or up toward the distant stars, what we seek is not truly the future, but the past still echoing within us. For memory does not live in books or stones or data. It lives in the human gaze, in the silence we feel before the sea, in the soft ache we feel beneath the stars. That is the voice of the ancient ages, and not calling us backward, but reminding us that we never really left. When the ice melts and the seas rise, when lost cities are drowned and then rediscovered, we find not only ruins, we find ourselves. Because everything that has ever existed, even for a moment, still lives within us, in our genes, in our minds, in our souls. And when we tell their stories, even in a single sentence, the world lives again. Perhaps that is what Earth wants us to understand. That memory is eternal. No one truly disappears. No place is ever truly gone. They simply return as a drop of water, a stone, a voice, or a dream.
And so as we close this journey, we do not say goodbye, because every ending, if you listen closely, is only another beginning.
If you've walked with us this far, It means that somewhere within you there is also a question. Not a question of proof, but of memory. Not to believe, but to remember. Thank you for traveling with us through ice and sea, through the stories of Earth and humankind. If your heart feels a little calmer, if your mind feels a little closer to time, leave a word, a sign, a breath, so that this small corner, amid the vast ocean of data, can remain a place where history still whispers beneath the stars. And perhaps on some distant night ahead, we will meet again, among the stars, beside the waves, or in another dream of humankind.